Hey there, tonight we're uncovering the brutal rituals of the ancient Mesopotamians, where the truth is, even their gods demanded offerings that would make a modern observer shiver. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now find your comfort zone, perhaps turn on a fan for that gentle background hum, and let's venture into tonight's story together. Mesopotamia, the land that might not have invented the wheel, but sure as heck rolled out civilization like a brand new carpet. Here you are, standing in what is now southern Iraq, but 5,000 years ago was the epicenter of everything cool and cutting edge. You're in the Fertile Crescent, which sounds like a fancy salad dressing, but was actually the sweet spot for early human innovation. This is where agriculture took off like a rocket, thanks to rivers with names as smooth as a medieval ballad, the Tigris and the Euphrates. It's around 3000 BCE, and you're hanging out in one of the first city-states, or maybe Babylon. They're like the Silicon Valleys of the ancient world, minus the hoodies and electric cars. Instead, you've got ziggurats, those towering, terraced temples that declare, we're closer to the gods than you are. And speaking of gods, oh boy, did they have a Rolodex full of them. There's Anu, the sky god, Enlil, who controls the wind, and Inanna, the goddess of love and war. Because why not mix romance with a side of battle axes? Now, here's the kicker. These gods are believed to control every facet of life. You stubbed your toe, Enlil must be ticked off. Your crops failed. Better make a sacrifice to appease Marduk. This divine micromanagement justified some rituals that would make even the most hardcore horror movie fans squirm. But before we dive into the nitty-gritty of those customs, let's talk about why you're even here, tending sheep, brewing beer, or carving cuneiform tablets. Economically speaking, Mesopotamia is the place to be. The economy is a bustling beast, fed by the trade of barley, wool, and the occasional luxury item like lapis lazuli. Barter is king, so you might be swapping 3 goats for a sack of grain or a shiny new clay tablet. Farmers, merchants, and scribes all play their part in this economic symphony. But remember, this prosperity doesn't come for free. Behind every successful trade deal is a society that takes its religious obligations very seriously. You see, the Mesopotamians believed that if they didn't keep the gods happy, the whole cosmic order could go kaput. This wasn't just about keeping the rain coming and the rivers flowing. It was about maintaining mad, not the Egyptian concept of cosmic order, but a similar idea that everything in the universe has its place and should stay there. So, when the priests say it's time for a ritual, you don't argue. You nod, smile, and maybe sharpen the sacrificial knife. The rituals themselves, they ranged from the mildly unsettling to the downright gruesome. Take the Akiru festival, for example. This was a New Year's bash with a little extra spice. It involved a ritual humiliation of the king, a sort of cosmic reset button to ensure the gods would favor the land for another year. Imagine that. Your ruler gets slapped around a bit, everyone claps, and then it's back to business as usual. It's like the ancient version of a corporate team-building exercise, but with more divine implications. Now, let's address the elephant in the room, or perhaps the ox on the altar, human sacrifice. It happened, but not as often as Hollywood would have you believe. It wasn't an everyday affair, like picking up a latte. But when it did occur, it was all about appeasing those almighty gods. And while we modern folks might cringe back then, it made perfect sense. The gods needed to know you were serious about your devotion, and nothing says, I'm committed, like the ultimate sacrifice. But let's not paint the Mesopotamians as mere bloodthirsty fanatics. They were also astronomers, mathematicians, and writers. They invented the concept of zero, penned down the epic of Gilgamesh, and mapped the stars long before we had telescopes. It's like they were trying to balance their cosmic checkbook, a little brutality here, a dash of brilliance there. So, as you navigate the bustling streets of Ur or Babylon, remember that these city-states were the blueprint for future civilizations. Yet they thrived on practices that seem, to us, slightly unhinged. In a world where gods pulled the puppet strings, every ritual had its place. Whether it's a festival, a sacrifice, or just a prayer for rain, these customs were the ancient version of insurance policies. And as you watch the priest raise his arms to the sky, You might just wonder if the guards are as enthralled by the spectacle as you are. And speaking of spectacles, let's dive into the Mesopotamian equivalent of a royal wedding, with an extra sprinkle of divine drama, the sacred marriage ritual. Now, before you conjure images of a lavish ceremony with a cake taller than a ziggurat, let's set the scene. This ancient ritual wasn't just a celebration. It was a cosmic performance where the king himself played the part of husband to the goddess Inanna. Think of it as the ultimate role-playing game, but instead of dice, you're rolling with destiny. Inanna, the goddess of love, war, and unbridled passion, was a deity you didn't want to mess with. She had a reputation for being as fierce as she was charming. Imagine a blend of Aphrodite and Athena, but with a Mesopotamian twist. Her divine consort, none other than the king, who had the dubious honor of stepping into this celestial soap opera. But why go through this elaborate charade? Political power, baby. This ritual wasn't just about divine romance. It was a shrewd move to legitimize the king's reign. By symbolically marrying a goddess, the king reinforced his divine right to rule, like stamping his authority with the universe's seal of approval. Picture this: a grand ceremony in a temple, perhaps the Inner Temple in Uruk, adorned with offerings and incense that would make even the gods swoon. The king and a high priestess, acting as Inanna's earthly representative, would perform this sacred union. And while we might imagine rose petals and soft music, the reality was probably more awkward than romantic. Let's face it, divine dating comes with its own set of challenges, not least of which is pretending your partner is a celestial being. Talk about pressure. The political motivations here are as clear as a Babylonian star map. In a society where the gods were believed to micromanage every detail of human life, linking the king to the divine was like holding a permanent backstage pass to the cosmic theater. It solidified his status, ensuring that any rebellion or dissent seemed not only treasonous, but sacrilegious. If you thought modern politics was a Game of Thrones, this was the original, with the stakes set somewhere between the heavens and the earth. But let's not get too carried away with romanticizing this ritual. While the idea of a sacred marriage might sound like a tale spun by ancient bards, the reality was likely more pragmatic. This wasn't just about divine love. It was about power dynamics, societal control, and keeping that cosmic order from spiraling into chaos. And in a world where the divine and the mortal were as intertwined as the Euphrates and Tigris, every little bit of celestial endorsement counted. Now, let's sift through some of the myths. Some say the sacred marriage was a grand public event, while others suggest it was a more private affair, whispered about in the corridors of power. The truth, likely somewhere in between. What we do know is that it was a cornerstone of the king's legitimacy, a ritual that echoed through the halls of history, even as the dust settled on the ruins of Uruk. And here's where things get a bit gallows humorish. Imagine being the king, enduring the ritual's awkwardness, while knowing your every move is scrutinized by priests and citizens alike. It's like being in a reality show, only with higher stakes and no commercial breaks. But if you aced this divine date, you walked away with the ultimate prize, an undisputed claim to the throne, backed by the goddess of love herself. So, next time you hear about a royal wedding, remember the sacred marriage of Mesopotamia, the ancient world's blend of political strategy and divine drama. And as the king steps away from the altar, perhaps he breathes a sigh of relief, knowing that his cosmic credentials are intact for another year. Meanwhile, the priests shuffle back to their duties, ensuring that the gods remain appeased and the rivers keep flowing. In the grand scheme of things, these rituals were more than just ceremonial pageantry. They were the glue that held society together, the bedrock of a civilization that balanced on the edge of divine favor and human ambition. And as we leave the temple, the echoes of ancient hymns fading into the desert winds, we're reminded that in the fertile lands of Mesopotamia, the line between the mortal and the divine was not just blurred. It was a dance, intricate and eternal. As we slip out of the temple, the sand whispering underfoot like a conspiratorial secret, we turn our gaze to the darker corners of Mesopotamian spirituality. Sure, divine marriages sound like an ancient soap opera with cosmic stakes, but let's delve into something grittier: human sacrifice and divination. If you thought the sacred marriage was a high-stakes drama, buckle up, because we're about to explore the underbelly of ancient desperation and political maneuvering. First, let's address the elephant, or perhaps the sacrificial lamb, in the room. Human sacrifice in Mesopotamia wasn't your everyday occurrence, despite what Hollywood might have you believe. There were no daily lines of victims waiting to meet their doom, a la Indiana Jones. Such sacrifices were rare, reserved for moments when the cosmic balance seemed as shaky as a clay pot on a windy day. Think cataclysmic floods, famines that made grain as scarce as a smile from a tax collector, or wars that threatened to turn city-states into archaeological footnotes. Now, imagine being a Mesopotamian priest in those times. You're not just some mystical figure. You're the spiritual CEO responsible for maintaining cosmic order. The economy is tanking, and the gods seem to be giving you the divine cold shoulder. What do? Well, it's time to show you're serious about getting their attention, and nothing screams commitment like a human sacrifice. Sure, it sounds brutal to our modern ears, but in a world where divine favor was the ultimate currency, this was a desperate gamble, a high-stakes roll of the celestial dice. And let's not forget the economics behind these grim practices. Mesopotamian society was like a finely tuned lyre, harmonizing trade, agriculture, and spirituality. A poor harvest could send shockwaves through this system, like a bad string breaking mid-concert. When the Tigris and Euphrates rivers decided to overflow their banks like a clumsy waiter spilling wine, the resulting chaos threatened not just crops, but the very stability of the city-state. In such dire straits, leaders might resort to extreme measures to placate the gods and restore balance. But before we paint the Mesopotamians as bloodthirsty maniacs, let's add some nuance. While human sacrifices are chilling, they were also seen as sacred transactions. The chosen individual wasn't just a victim, but a revered offering, often treated with the respect due to someone about to take a one-way trip to the divine realm. It's like being part of the ultimate VIP program, albeit with a very steep entry fee. Now, let's talk divination, a practice that was less about crystal balls and more about reading the cosmic fine print. Imagine a world where every sneeze, every cloud formation, and every dream could be a message from the gods. The Mesopotamians were the original data analysts, poring over sheep livers and celestial patterns like ancient statisticians trying to predict the stock market. This was serious business, not just superstition. Kings and rulers would make decisions based on these readings, which could sway everything from warfare to marriage alliances. Divination wasn't just about reading the stars. It was about interpreting the whims of the gods, who were as fickle as a cat at a buffet. The diviners, or Baru priests, were the intermediaries with a heartline to the divine. They had to be as skilled at interpreting omens as they were at navigating the complex socio-political landscape. If the gods sent a bad omen, it wasn't just a cosmic shrug. It was a call to action, often leading to rituals designed to avert disaster. Let's debunk a popular myth, the idea that these practices were purely mystical mumbo-jumbo. In reality, they were entangled with the very fabric of Mesopotamian society. Divination was a tool for political and economic decision-making, a way to legitimize actions and policies with divine approval. Think of it as ancient PR, with the gods as the ultimate endorsers. But why did these extreme measures hold such sway? It boils down to the precariousness of Mesopotamian life. The fertile land was a double-edged sword, capable of sustaining prosperity, but equally adept at unleashing nature's fury. In a world where the boundary between survival and disaster was as thin as a cuneiform tablet, every decision carried weight. And as we wrap up this chapter of Mesopotamian history, let's reflect on the human element. Behind every ritual, every sacrifice, and every divination was a society grappling with forces beyond its control. It was a dance between human agency and divine will, a testament to the resilience of a civilization that faced uncertainty with a mix of ingenuity and reverence. So, next time you hear about ancient sacrifices or divination, remember, these weren't just barbaric practices of a bygone era. They were the survival strategies of a people trying to navigate a world where the gods held sway over every aspect of life. And as the sun sets over the ziggurates and the rivers flow on, the echoes of these ancient customs remind us of the lengths humanity will go to seek order in chaos. As the sun sets over the ziggurates and the rivers flow on, the echoes of these ancient customs remind us of the lengths humanity will go to seek order in chaos. But speaking of echoes, let's talk about the final curtain call, death rituals and the afterlife in Mesopotamia. If you thought their life was a heady mix of divine drama and human hustle, wait until you hear about their departure plans. Spoiler alert, it's not all golden caskets and pyramid schemes. In Mesopotamia, the afterlife wasn't just a nebulous concept. It was a whole other realm meticulously imagined, and frankly, a tad grim. Imagine a vast, dusty underworld where the dead roamed, not in blissful repose, but in a kind of eternal, bureaucratic waiting room. The Mesopotamians called it the land of no return. Sounds about as inviting as a dentist's waiting room with no Wi-Fi. Here, the souls hung out in a shadowy existence, subsisting on dust and scraps. Not exactly the all-inclusive resort package you might hope for in the afterlife, but let's not get too morbid just yet. While the commoners might have been resigned to such dreary digs, the elite had different plans. If you were someone important, you didn't just shuffle off to the afterlife unceremoniously. Oh no, your departure was nothing short of a production worthy of an Oscar nod. Think lavish tombs, intricate rituals, and grave goods aplenty. The elite were buried with treasures meant to ease their passage and demonstrate their status. It was less about resting in peace and more about making a statement in the eternal hereafter. Take the royal cemetery at Ur, where archaeologists discovered tombs that could give any modern art collector a run for their money. Queen Puabi's lavish burial, for instance, featured a staggering array of gold, lapis lazuli, and carnelian. And let's not forget the entourage. Servants, soldiers, and even musicians were buried alongside to serve in the afterlife. It's like an ancient VIP suite, but with the creepy twist of real people being part of the package deal. Talk about commitment to the boss. But what did all this opulence cost? Well, dying in style wasn't cheap. A royal burial could consume resources equivalent to several years' worth of barley or livestock. Imagine splurging your entire annual salary on a funeral, and then some. While the elite could afford these elaborate send-offs, commoners didn't have the same luxury. Their burials were simpler, with fewer grave goods. A mat, a few parts, maybe a cherished item or two, and you were good to go. This stark contrast in burial practices reflects not just wealth disparities, but also societal pressures. For the elite, a grand burial was a final display of power and status, a way to secure their legacy in both this world and the next. For commoners, the focus was on the essentials, shaped by economic realities rather than celestial aspirations. It was the ultimate form of keeping up with the Joneses, or in this case, the Sumerians. But why this obsession with burial bling and the afterlife? It boils down to the Mesopotamian worldview, which intertwined life, death, and divine favor in a cosmic dance. The belief was that how you left this world could influence your standing in the next. A well-equipped tomb might curry favor with the gods, ensuring a smoother transition to the underworld. It was like ancient networking. Bring enough gifts, and you just might get a better seat at the table of the afterlife. However, let's debunk a popular myth, the idea that all Mesopotamians were obsessed with death. The truth is, their rituals were more about respect and continuity than morbid fascination. These practices ensured that the deceased continued to play a role in the community, even from beyond the grave. Ancestors were honored and remembered, their spirits invoked in familial and communal gatherings. It was a way to maintain social ties, even in the face of mortality's finality. Yet, there's a certain romantic appeal to these death rituals, a fascination with the idea of an afterlife filled with treasures and eternal service. It's a narrative that captivates, even as it disguises the harsh economic realities that fueled such practices. The truth is, these elaborate burials were as much about earthly power dynamics as they were about spiritual beliefs. For the Mesopotamians, death was not just an end, but a continuation of life's intricate tapestry, woven with threads of wealth, status, and divine favor. So, as we stand at the edge of a sun-drenched tomb, pondering the whispered stories of lives long past, we're reminded of the timeless human quest for meaning. In the bustling city-states of Ur and Babylon, rituals were not just acts of faith, but reflections of a society striving to balance the earthly and the eternal, the tangible and the transcendent. And as we peer into the shadows of the Mesopotamian afterlife, see not just the remnants of a civilization lost to time, but echoes of our own enduring journey to make sense of life and death. Stay tuned, because our exploration of Mesopotamian life and rituals isn't over yet. We've got more ancient secrets to unearth, and trust me, You won't want to miss the twists and turns still to come. The past is just as thrilling and unpredictable as the latest blockbuster, full of unexpected revelations and timeless truths. So hold onto your cuneiform tablets, because our historical adventure is just getting started. As we continue this journey through the dusty scrolls of Mesopotamian life, let's pause to consider how these ancient rituals ripple through the corridors of time, echoing in modern culture and religion like a catchy tune you just can't shake. It's a bit like discovering that your favorite rock band's latest hit is actually a cover of a song from the 70s. It might be dressed up differently, but the core melody remains the same. First up, let's talk about how human sacrifice and ritualistic drama have shape-shifted into more symbolic practices. Think of it as the ultimate rebranding exercise. Remember those gruesome sacrifices meant to appease the gods? Well, they've morphed into more palatable forms in modern religious ceremonies. Communion, for example, is a symbolic act that echoes the idea of sacrifice, transforming gruesome reality into spiritual metaphor. It's like trading in your bloody battle axe for a ceremonial chalice, much easier on the eyes and conscience. And what about those grandiose death rituals and afterlife beliefs? You might not be burying your loved ones with gold and servants anymore, despite what some extravagant funerals might suggest. But the notion of an afterlife persists, albeit in a cleaner, less dusty format. Religions worldwide still offer visions of life after death, promising paradise, reincarnation, or spiritual continuity. It's as if the Mesopotamian knack for imagining a netherworld with its own peculiar rules and hierarchies has left an indelible mark on our collective psyche. Now, here's where things get really intriguing. The sacred marriage ritual, with its blend of politics and divinity, might seem like an ancient relic, yet its spirit lives on in the concept of divine right and political authority endorsed by higher powers. From medieval monarchs claiming God-given rule to modern politicians invoking divine support, the echoes of Mesopotamian strategies resonate with a familiar tune. It's like the ancient world's version of fake it till you make it, with a celestial twist. But let's not get too romantic about it all. The truth is, the allure of these rituals often masks the harsh economic and social realities that birthed them. The Mesopotamians weren't just wide-eyed dreamers. They were pragmatic folks navigating a world where nature's whims could topple empires. Their rituals were survival strategies as much as spiritual endeavors, crafted to placate gods as unpredictable as the rivers they revered. These ceremonies, steeped in the mystique of the divine, were also about maintaining social order and political power in a fragile world. And speaking of myths, let's tackle the romanticized view of these ancient practices head-on. It's easy to get swept up in the drama of kings marrying goddesses or priests gazing into sheep livers for divine guidance. But beneath the surface glamour lies a hard truth. These rituals were as much about earthly concerns as heavenly ones. When you strip away the mysticism, you find a society grappling with the same issues that challenge us today: power, survival, and the quest for meaning in a chaotic universe. Consider the Akiru festival, that ancient New Year's bash where kings got a public dressing down. It's tempting to see this as a quaint tradition, but in reality, it was a calculated move to renew the social contract, reminding both ruler and ruled of their place in the cosmic pecking order. It's a bit like a modern CEO taking a pie to the face at a corporate retreat. Humiliating, sure, but ultimately reinforcing their leadership in a strangely reassuring way. So, what's the takeaway from this whirlwind tour of Mesopotamian rituals? It's a reminder that history is a complex tapestry, woven with threads of legend and reality. These ancient customs, with their blend of the sacred and the pragmatic, offer a mirror to our own society, reflecting our timeless struggle to find order amid chaos and meaning in the mundane. As we wrap up this adventure, let's appreciate the lasting legacy of the Mesopotamians. Their rituals, though steeped in blood and mystery, were born from a need to understand and control a world that often seemed capricious and cruel. In their search for cosmic order, they crafted narratives that still resonate today, shaping our stories, our religions, and our understanding of what it means to be human. So, as you lay down your metaphorical tablet and let these tales of ancient intrigue lull you into reflection, remember, the past isn't just a distant land of strange customs and forgotten gods. It's a living, breathing tapestry that continues to inform our present and inspire our future. Whether it's the grandiosity of a sacred marriage or the stark reality of a sacrificial altar, these echoes from Mesopotamia remind us that the dance between the divine and the human is as eternal as the rivers that once nurtured the cradle of civilization. If you thought communication was a challenge in the age of social media, spare a thought for the ancient Egyptians, who kicked off their own version of Instagram nearly 5,000 years ago. Yes, we're talking about hieroglyphs, the OG of visual storytelling, making modern emojis seem like stick figures in comparison. Around 3,300 BCE, while the rest of the world was still figuring out the wheel, Egyptians were busy inventing a language that was part art, part script, and entirely mesmerizing. And here's the kicker. Hieroglyphs weren't just about pretty pictures. They were a sophisticated system of communication that, believe it or not, started as a practical tool for scribes, not just as wall decorations for Pharaoh's Instagram accounts. Now, let's set the stage. Picture the Nile River Valley, where fertile lands were the perfect backdrop for a civilization on the rise. The Egyptians, ever practical, knew they needed a way to record everything from royal decrees to grain inventories. Enter the scribe, the ancient equivalent of a data analyst, except instead of Excel spreadsheets, they had papyrus scrolls and chisels. Hieroglyphs emerged as a solution to this burgeoning need for record-keeping, blending pictorial symbols with phonetic sounds to create a written language as complex and nuanced as a contemporary comment section. Here's where it gets interesting. The writing system wasn't just utilitarian. It evolved into an art form that could convey the divine aura of the gods and the grandiosity of the pharaohs. The Egyptians believed their kings were gods on earth, so naturally, their communication needed a touch of the divine. The result was an intricate tapestry of symbols that could express everything from the mundane to the mystical. Think of it as the difference between sending a text and commissioning a watercolor painting to convey the same message. Hieroglyphs had that level of flair. But before we get too carried away romanticizing these ancient texts, let's pull back the curtain on the harsh realities. Creating hieroglyphs was no easy task. Imagine a world where there are no shortcuts, no copy-paste functions. Every symbol had to be meticulously carved or painted, requiring precision and a steady hand. This wasn't just art for art's sake. It was a labor-intensive process, often reserved for the elite. Not everyone in Egypt was literate, and the ability to read and write hieroglyphs was a skill that set scribes apart as an intellectual elite. In a society where most people were more concerned with harvesting crops than reading, literacy was a status symbol. The romantic notion of hieroglyphs as a universal language of beauty has its appeal, but the reality was far more bureaucratic. The Egyptians used hieroglyphs to document everything from religious texts to tax records, ensuring that the wheels of their society kept turning. And while we might think of hieroglyphs as primarily decorative, their primary function was as a tool for administration, commerce, and ritual. They were the paperwork of ancient Egypt, albeit far more visually striking than any tax form you'll encounter today. Now, let's demystify one of the biggest myths about hieroglyphs, the idea that they were an impenetrable code. For centuries, scholars scratched their heads trying to unlock their secrets, until the Rosetta Stone was discovered in 1799, providing the key to deciphering these ancient symbols. This artifact was essentially the Rosetta Stone app of its day, offering a multilingual translation that finally allowed hieroglyphs to be understood in the modern era. Until then, the symbols were as enigmatic as a teenager's text full of acronyms. Speaking of enigmas, it's worth noting that hieroglyphs were not the only writing system in ancient Egypt. There was also hieratic and demotic script, more cursive in style, and used for everyday purposes. Hieroglyphs were reserved for monumental inscriptions and sacred texts, where aesthetics mattered as much as accuracy. This duality speaks to the complexity of Egyptian society, balancing the practical with the ceremonial, the mundane with the majestic. In essence, hieroglyphs were more than just a language. They were a reflection of the Egyptian worldview. They captured the essence of a civilization that saw the divine in the everyday and the eternal in the ephemeral. So, next time you use an emoji, remember you're part of a long tradition of visual communication that began with the Egyptians. And while our modern symbols might lack the grandeur of a hieroglyphic inscription, they share the same fundamental purpose: to connect us, across time and space, with the stories we need to tell. So, next time you use an emoji, remember you're part of a long tradition of visual communication that began with the Egyptians. And while our modern symbols might lack the grandeur of a hieroglyphic inscription, they share the same fundamental purpose: to connect us, across time and space, with the stories we need to tell. Now, let's peel back the papyrus layers and take a hard look at the economic and social machinery that cranked out those hieroglyphs, all the while keeping the Egyptian elite knee-deep in status symbols. Step into the Old Kingdom, around 2686 to 2181 BCE, where the pyramids weren't the only thing being built brick by brick. The Egyptian state was a burgeoning bureaucracy, and like any self-respecting empire, it thrived on paperwork. Only in this case, it was papyrus work. Picture this: a civilization that stretched over 600 miles along the Nile, with a population that needed to be fed, taxed, and occasionally conscripted into pyramid-building duty. The Egyptians weren't just doodling on temple walls for kicks. They were creating a system to keep this well-oiled machine running. The demand for scribes skyrocketed as the state apparatus expanded, and hieroglyphs were their primary toolkit. Scribes were the unsung heroes of the Egyptian economy, the original data crunchers. They recorded everything from grain stalks to the number of workers on a construction site. And while the pharaohs might have been the face of Egyptian grandeur, it was the scribes who ensured the wheels didn't fall off the chariot. These guys weren't just literate. They were literate in a language that was as exclusive as it was intricate. In a society where literacy was rarer than a solar eclipse, the ability to read and write hieroglyphs was the ultimate status symbol. Fast forward to the Middle Kingdom, roughly 2050 to 1710 BCE, and the plot thickens. The pharaohs of this era, ever the shrewd politicians, realized that a centralized state required more than just big statues and grand tombs. It needed efficiency. Enter a more refined hieroglyphic script and an increase in administrative texts. The Middle Kingdom scribes were not just chronicling the past, they were actively shaping the present, and their hieroglyphs reflected this shift. The hieroglyphs became more standardized, a bit like the autocorrect of ancient Egypt, ensuring that everyone was on the same page, literally. And here's where it gets interesting. As the bureaucracy became more complex, so did the hieroglyphs. They evolved to express subtleties and nuances necessary for contracts, legal documents, and even literature. It's like upgrading from a flip phone to the latest smartphone, vital for those who could afford it, and a mark of prestige for those who wielded it. But let's not pretend this was some egalitarian paradise. The hierarchy in ancient Egypt was as rigid as the pyramids themselves. The ability to read and write was a privilege reserved for the upper echelons, the same folks who could afford to have their names and deeds immortalized in stone. Hieroglyphs were their way of shouting, "I was here," across the millennia, a privilege denied to the average Joe, or more accurately, the average Jehudi. And here's a myth ripe for debunking: the notion that hieroglyphs were a static, unchanging language etched in stone both literally and figuratively. In reality, the script was as dynamic as the society it served, evolving with the times. The Egyptians were nothing if not adaptable, and their writing system reflected their ability to navigate the shifting sands of political and economic change. As we delve deeper into this linguistic labyrinth, let's acknowledge the romance while we expose the reality. Hieroglyphs may have been the language of the gods, but they were also the language of tax collectors and census takers. Sure, they adorned the walls of temples and tombs, whispering tales of divine kingship and cosmic order. But they also told of grain quotas, military conscriptions, and the mundane minutiae of daily life. It was a duality that mirrored the Egyptian worldview, where the sacred and the secular were two sides of the same scarab amulet. In the end, hieroglyphs were more than just pretty pictures. They were the backbone of a civilization that understood the power of the written word. They spoke to the Egyptians' desire to communicate across time, to leave a legacy that would outlast even the grandest of monuments. And while they might have started as a tool for the ruling elite, they became a testament to the ingenuity and creativity of an entire culture. As we continue to unravel the threads of this ancient script, let's keep our eyes peeled for the economic and social forces that continue to shape our understanding of hieroglyphs. There's more to uncover in the sands of time, and who knows what secrets these symbols still hold. Tune in next time as we dive deeper into the world of hieroglyphs and the stories they tell. As we continue to peel back the layers of hieroglyphic history, let's tackle one of the most alluring myths head-on: the idea that these symbols were imbued with mystical powers. Ah, the allure of magic. Who doesn't love a good tale of ancient spells and divine scripts? For centuries, hieroglyphs were thought to be more than just letters or words. People believed they held arcane secrets, capable of influencing both the natural and supernatural worlds. But before you start imagining Egyptian scribes as Hogwarts graduates, let's get a grip on reality. The mystique of hieroglyphs as magical symbols is partly due to the Egyptians' own PR genius. They were masters at blending the mundane with the mystical. Consider the elaborate ceremonies and rituals inscribed on temple walls, where hieroglyphs played a starring role. These inscriptions were more than religious texts. They were performances etched in stone, designed to convey divine power and authority. The Egyptians believed that words had an intrinsic power, and writing them down could make things happen. This wasn't just a mystical notion, but a practical belief tied to their religious worldview. Imagine writing a shopping list and expecting your groceries to magically appear, if only. This belief in the power of the written word was deeply ingrained in Egyptian culture. The Book of the Dead, a collection of spells and incantations, was often buried with the deceased to guide them through the afterlife. The Egyptians weren't just hoping their loved ones would have a smooth journey, they were ensuring it, one hieroglyph at a time. But let's be clear, this wasn't magic as we think of it, with wands and wizardry. It was more akin to an ancient insurance policy, a way to ensure the guards were on your side when you really needed them. Now, let's fast forward a bit to when the Greeks and Romans came onto the scene. They were fascinated by Egyptian culture, seeing it as ancient and mysterious, which to them essentially meant must be magic. The Greeks, in particular, were smitten with the notion that hieroglyphs were not just a writing system, but a form of sacred art that only the Egyptian priests could understand, a kind of divine coding language. This idea was partly due to the Greeks' love affair with symbols and their belief in the hidden meanings of things. They saw hieroglyphs as an enigmatic code, a romantic notion that fueled speculation for centuries. The Romans, not to be outdone, jumped on the bandwagon. They were all about power and prestige, and what better way to convey that than by appropriating some of the mystique of Egyptian hieroglyphs. They incorporated them into their own monuments, not necessarily understanding them, but appreciating their decorative and symbolic value. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of getting a tattoo in a language you don't speak. It looks cool, and that's what matters. However, this outsider fascination with hieroglyphs as magical symbols wasn't just based on ignorance. It was also about control. By framing hieroglyphs as mystical and otherworldly, the Greeks and Romans could justify their own intellectual superiority. If they couldn't understand it, then it must be because it was beyond human comprehension, thus elevating their own cultural narratives. It's a classic case of making something you can't understand seem divinely complex rather than admitting you just don't get it. Despite these misunderstandings, the practical uses of hieroglyphs remained evident. They were still being used to record everything from religious texts to economic transactions. The Egyptians continued to wield their pens, or chisels, with precision, ensuring their society functioned smoothly. But the allure of the mystical persisted, a testament to the power of storytelling and the human penchant for romance over reality. The legend of hieroglyphs as magical symbols has a certain charm, doesn't it? The idea that a simple carving could hold the key to the universe is tempting. But the reality was far more grounded. Hieroglyphs were a tool, one that required immense skill and dedication to master. They were instruments of power, both political and spiritual, and their true magic lay in their ability to connect people across time, space, and the realm of the gods. As we unravel the threads of this ancient script, it's important to see both the legend and the harsh reality. Hieroglyphs may have been surrounded by an aura of mysticism, but their true power lay in their practicality and the culture that created them. They were a reflection of a civilization that saw the divine in the everyday, the eternal in the ephemeral. So next time you come across an Egyptian symbol, Remember, it's not just an ancient doodle. It's a glimpse into a world where words and power were inseparable, where the pen was mightier than the sword, and sometimes just as mystical. As we continue our journey through the sands of time, keep in mind the Greeks and Romans who, despite their misunderstandings, helped preserve Egyptian culture in their own way. Their fascination, though misguided, ensured that the hieroglyphs and the civilization they represented remained a topic of intrigue. But there's more to explore in the world of Egyptian hieroglyphs, from their evolution to their eventual decline. So stay tuned as we delve deeper, unearthing the stories these symbols continue to tell. And as we step further into this historical rabbit hole, it's time to wave a gentle goodbye to hieroglyphs as we explore how they took a backseat to the slick new kid on the Nile block, the Demotic script. Think of Demotic as the VHS of ancient Egypt, an easier, more convenient format that outpaced the clunky, albeit charming, Betamax of hieroglyphs. But why did this shift happen? Well, buckle up, because we're diving into the socio-political drama that saw hieroglyphs become the ancient version of your grandpa's dusty vinyl records. Let's rewind to around the 7th century BCE. Egypt was no longer the isolated powerhouse it once was. It had become a cultural melting pot, a bustling hub where Greek, Persian, and later Roman influences mingled like tourists in a Cairo bazaar. These outside cultures brought their own scripts, languages, and ideas. The Greeks, for instance, had a particular penchant for efficiency and simplicity, traits that the Demotic script embodied. Demotic was the shorthand of its day, a cursive script that allowed scribes to keep up with the bustling pace of trade and administration. Imagine trying to write an email with calligraphy. Impressive, but not practical when you're dealing with a growing economy and a diverse population. Like swapping out your old Nokia for a smartphone, Egyptians began to embrace Demotic for its utility. It was faster to write, easier to learn, and crucially, it could be read by a broader audience. The marketplace was booming, and Egyptians needed a writing system that could keep pace with their expanding trade networks. While hieroglyphs were perfect for inscribing eternal truths on temple walls, they were less suited to the day-to-day business of contracts, receipts, and love letters. Demotic, with its streamlined efficiency, fit the bill perfectly. Now, it's not like hieroglyphs vanished overnight. They hung around like a beloved but outdated family heirloom, still used for religious texts and monumental inscriptions. After all, you wouldn't carve the latest stock prices on the side of a pyramid. But as the centuries rolled by, their use became more symbolic than practical. By the time Cleopatra was dealing with Roman emperors and dramatic love affairs, Demotic had become the script of choice for most Egyptians. Hieroglyphs were reserved for the sacred and ceremonial, a nod to the ancient traditions that shaped Egyptian identity. But the decline of hieroglyphs wasn't just about practicality. It also reflected broader shifts in Egyptian society. As foreign powers like the Greeks and Romans took control, the cultural landscape of Egypt transformed. The Ptolemies, Greek rulers of Egypt, were particularly instrumental in promoting Greek language and culture, which led to a decline in the traditional Egyptian ways of life. This shift signaled a broader trend of globalization, where cultural exchange wasn't just a footnote, it was the main event. Hieroglyphs, with their deep connections to Egyptian religion and kingship, found themselves pushed to the periphery in a world that was changing faster than a river's course after a flood. This isn't to say that hieroglyphs were entirely abandoned. Like vinyl records making a hipster comeback, they retained their allure and mystique, especially in the realms of religion and magic. But in the world of commerce, law, and daily life, Demotic was king. It's a classic case of form following function, where the demands of the time dictated the tools people used. The rise of Demotic also highlights the adaptability of Egyptian culture. Despite the romantic notion of pharaohs and pyramids frozen in time, Egypt was a dynamic society that evolved with the times. It absorbed and adapted foreign influences, incorporating them into its own rich tapestry of history and identity. This ability to change while maintaining a sense of continuity is at the heart of why Egypt remained a formidable cultural force, even as political power shifted. However, as the Roman Empire tightened its grip, Latin began to seep into the Egyptian script landscape, further pushing hieroglyphs into obsolescence. Roman colonizers saw Egypt as a land to be exploited rather than understood, and their focus was on governance and control rather than cultural preservation. The Romans had little use for hieroglyphs, which they viewed as arcane relics of a bygone era. For them, the practicality of Latin and Greek suited their administrative needs far better. The decline of hieroglyphs mirrors the end of an era, where the golden age of pharaohs gave way to foreign rule and new cultures. Much like how the trusty VHS was usurped by DVDs, then streaming services, hieroglyphs were sidelined by the relentless march of time and innovation. They became symbols of a storied past, revered yet no longer central to the everyday life of Egyptians. This transition wasn't just about writing systems, but spoke to the broader changes in Egyptian society. As Egypt became more cosmopolitan, its identity evolved, shaped by the tides of history. The story of hieroglyphs is one of resilience and adaptation, a testament to a civilization that, even in decline, found ways to remain relevant and influential. In this tale of shifting sands, hieroglyphs remind us of the beauty and complexity of human expression. Even as they fell out of favor, they left a legacy that continues to captivate us, a language that speaks of gods, kings, and the eternal quest to communicate across time. And while they may no longer be the lingua franca of Egypt, their echoes remain, a reminder of a time when words were as much art as they were information. As we move forward in our exploration, we'll see how these ancient symbols continue to influence modern perceptions of Egypt, both the myths we cherish and the realities we uncover. Stay tuned as we navigate the fascinating interplay between ancient scripts and the cultures that wielded them, revealing the stories they still have to tell. Just when you thought hieroglyphs had been tucked away like grandma's old photo albums, collecting dust in the attic of history, along comes the Napoleonic era to give them a dramatic encore. Cue the Rosetta Stone, the real MVP of ancient script decryption. Discovered in 1799 by a French soldier during Napoleon's Egyptian campaign, this seemingly unassuming slab of granodiorite was the ancient world's version of a multilingual Rosetta Stone app. With inscriptions in Greek, Demotic, and hieroglyphs, it was like finding a lost password that unlocked the mysteries of a long-forgotten digital account. Here's the scoop. The Rosetta Stone was carved in 196 BCE during the reign of Ptolemy V. It was essentially a decree, probably as riveting as your local government's latest tax code update, but its real value was its trilingual text. The Greek script was the key, as it was still understood in the 19th century. Picture the scene. Linguists across Europe practically salivating over the prospect of deciphering hieroglyphs, a script that had been the linguistic equivalent of a black hole for centuries. Enter Jean-Francois Champollion, a French scholar with a penchant for cracking codes. In 1822, after years of staring at squiggly lines and symbols that would drive most to insanity, Champollion shouted Eureka, or the French equivalent, and laid the foundation for modern Egyptology by deciphering the hieroglyphs on the Rosetta Stone. He realized that these symbols weren't just decorative art. They represented sounds and concepts, a sophisticated mix of phonetics and ideograms. It was a breakthrough that made him the rock star of his time, if rock stars were obsessed with ancient scripts instead of electric guitars. Champollion's work was nothing short of revolutionary. It was as if someone had handed historians the ultimate cheat sheet, allowing them to finally read the secrets inscribed on tombs, temples, and monuments. This newfound understanding was like unlocking a treasure trove of historical insight, revealing not only the stories of gods and kings, but also the economic and social intricacies of ancient Egypt. Suddenly, those mysterious symbols were more than just pretty pictures. They were a window into a civilization that had long fascinated the world. The discovery fueled a global obsession with all things Egyptian. The 19th century saw a surge in Egyptomania, with everything from architecture to fashion borrowing Egyptian motifs. Obelisks popped up in city squares, Cleopatra-inspired jewelry became the height of fashion, and sarcophagi-themed furniture graced the parlors of the elite. It was like an ancient Egyptian revival, with a touch of Victorian flair. But while the world went gaga over sphinxes and scarabs, the true significance of the Rosetta Stone was its ability to bridge the past with the present. The ability to read hieroglyphs meant that historians could piece together a more accurate picture of Egyptian society, dispelling myths and shedding light on the realities of daily life. It was less about curses and more about commerce, less about mystical rituals and more about the mechanics of a complex society. Fast forward to today, and the fascination with hieroglyphs continues. Modern technology has taken Champalian's work and turbocharged it. With tools like computer algorithms and digital imaging, researchers can analyze hieroglyphs with a precision that would make 19th century scholars weep with envy. These technologies have allowed historians to decode even the most obscure symbols, piecing together languages and dialects like a linguistic jigsaw puzzle. And let's not forget the role of the internet, which has democratized access to these ancient scripts. Now, anyone with an interest and a Wi-Fi connection can delve into the world of hieroglyphs, exploring online databases and virtual reconstructions of ancient sites. This digital renaissance has made the study of hieroglyphs more accessible than ever, allowing a new generation to engage with these ancient symbols. The legacy of hieroglyphs is a testament to the enduring power of human expression. They remind us that even in a world dominated by digital communication, the need to tell stories, record history, and connect with one another remains unchanged. They speak to our innate desire to understand the past, to learn from it, and to find meaning in the symbols we create. In the grand tapestry of history, hieroglyphs are more than just a footnote. They're a chapter that continues to be written. As we look to the future, we carry with us the lessons of the past, understanding that while the tools of communication may evolve, the essence of what it means to be human remains constant. So next time you send an emoji-laden text, take a moment to appreciate the art of visual communication that began over 5 millennia ago on the banks of the Nile. As we draw this exploration to a close, consider the dual legacy of hieroglyphs. They are both a reminder of the grandeur of ancient Egypt and a symbol of our relentless pursuit of knowledge. Their story is one of resilience and adaptation, of a civilization that, even in decline, found ways to remain relevant. In hieroglyphs, we see the beauty and complexity of human expression, a language that spoke of gods, kings, and the eternal quest to communicate across time. So here's to hieroglyphs, the original social media, the ancient storytellers, and the timeless symbols that remind us that while the world may change, the stories we tell, and the way we tell them, remain a fundamental part of our shared human experience. In the winding, dusty corridors of history, the Silk Road wasn't just some ancient Amazon prime delivering silk scarves and exotic spices with a 2-day guarantee. Nope, it was more like the Wild West meets a global swap meet, minus the cowboy hats and with a lot more camels. And right in the heart of this chaotic crossroad sat the Sogdians. Sogdiana, an ancient region that would now snugly fit into parts of Uzbekistan and Tajikistan, is where the real action happened, nestled between the towering Pamir Mountains and the sun-baked Kizilkum Desert. Think of the Sogdians as the ultimate middlemen, the kind who knew how to turn a profit faster than you can say silk. These folks were trading geniuses, effortlessly moving goods like silk, gold, and spices along the Silk Road, which wasn't so much a single road as a network of trade routes stretching over 4,000 miles, connecting China to the Mediterranean. They basically ran a prehistoric version of Etsy, where instead of handmade soaps, they offered luxury goods and rare items that travelers from far-flung corners of the known world would kill to get their hands on. Now, here's the kicker. All this trading didn't just pad their pockets, it reshaped their souls. Religion in Sogdiana was like a buffet at a Las Vegas casino. There was a bit of everything, and everyone was welcome to try a taste. Zoroastrianism, Buddhism, Manichaeism, Nestorian Christianity, and even some local cults with their own little quirks. The Sogdians dabbled in it all. Why? Because when your economy depends on keeping a diverse clientele happy, you make sure everyone feels at home. The economic incentives were clear. A bit of religious flexibility could go a long way in making sure your caravan of treasures got across the desert without a hitch. And let's face it, when you're living smack dab in the middle of the world's most lucrative trade network, you don't want to be the guy turning business away because of a theological disagreement. Instead, the Sogdians perfected the art of religious adaptation, becoming spiritual chameleons who could blend into any belief system that came their way. Yet, before we all start waxing poetic about the Silk Road as a symbol of multicultural harmony, let's pump the brakes and debunk some myths. Contrary to popular belief, the Silk Road was not a peaceful, Cumbia-fueled path of enlightenment. It was more like a global flea market with a side of danger. Bandits, harsh climates, and political unrest were the norm, not the exception. Forget romanticized tales of serene camel caravans under starry skies. The reality was more like surviving a Mad Max-style adventure, where getting robbed or caught in a territorial skirmish was just another Tuesday. And while we're busy myth-busting, let's not forget that the Sogdians weren't just passive bystanders in all this. They were active players who knew how to navigate the chaos to their advantage. They didn't just adapt to these religious melting pots for fun. They did it because it was good for business. The more they embraced the spiritual diversity around them, the more they could ensure safe passage for their goods, secure new trading partners, and maintain their status as the Silk Road's most savvy entrepreneurs. In the end, the Sogdians were the ultimate pragmatists, weaving a rich tapestry of beliefs, not just because they could, but because they understood the value of a well-placed prayer as much as a well-placed trade route. Their story is a testament to the power of adaptability and the economic incentives that can shape an entire culture's religious landscape. And as for the Silk Road, despite its romantic veneer, it was a gritty, unpredictable place where survival of the shrewdest was the order of the day. The Sogdians, with their nimble minds and open hearts, were the masters of this game, navigating the trade winds of history with a sly smile and a deal always in the making. And so, as the Sogdians danced their way through the tumultuous symphony of the Silk Road, their religious canvas was getting painted with strokes of everything from Zoroastrian fire altars to the serene smiles of Buddhist bodhisattvas. You see, these ancient traders were not just spiritual dabblers for the sake of it. They were the original buffet enthusiasts, piling their plates high with different beliefs because, in the grand bazaar of history, variety wasn't just the spice of life. It was the very ticket to survival. Now, let's break down this religious jambalaya. At the heart of Sogdian belief was Zoroastrianism, the ancient Persian religion that was all about cosmic dualism and the eternal battle between good and evil. Think of it as the original blockbuster showdown, long before Marvel made it cool. The Sogdians were all in on this, adopting fire temples and rituals dedicated to Ahura Mazda, the supreme deity. Yet, they weren't monogamous in their worship. They invited Buddhism to the party, and boy, did it bring a whole new vibe. Buddhism, with its promise of enlightenment and karma points, appealed to the Sogdians' pragmatic side. After all, who wouldn't want a little spiritual insurance when you're threading the needle between fortune and folly on those treacherous trade routes? By the 4th century CE, Sogdian merchants were not only embracing Buddhist teachings, but also spreading them like silk threads across Central Asia. They played the role of cultural DJs, remixing Zoroastrian chants with Buddhist mantras, creating a spiritual soundtrack that could accompany any caravan journey. But wait, there's more. Local cults and traditions added their own flavors to this religious stew. Sogdian villages, scattered across oases and river valleys, had their own deities and rituals, often tied to agriculture and the whims of nature. Picture this: a Zoroastrian priest negotiating with a local shaman over the best way to ensure a good harvest, while a Buddhist monk offers meditative advice on patience and understanding. It was a spiritual marketplace, as dynamic as the physical one bustling with silk and spices. The political landscape of the region was just as eclectic as its religious one. The Sogdians were sandwiched between mighty empires like the Sasanian Persians to the west and the Tang dynasty of China to the east. These geopolitical powerhouses were like the heavyweight champions of their day, and Sogdiana was the ring in which they occasionally threw punches or offers of alliance. The Sogdians were adept at playing these juggernauts against each other, much like a savvy negotiator pitting two job offers against one another to get a better deal. Their strategic location made Sogdiana a melting pot of cultures and a prime target for conquest. Yet, instead of resisting these influences, the Sogdians embraced them. They knew that aligning with the right power at the right time could mean the difference between prosperity and obliteration. By adopting elements of their neighbors' religions and cultures, they turned potential threats into trading partners and allies. It was a high-stakes game of cultural diplomacy, where the rules were as fluid as the shifting sands of the desert. Through this lens, the Sogdian approach to religion wasn't just about spiritual curiosity. It was a calculated strategy for survival and success. By being religiously flexible, they could secure safe passage through territories controlled by various powers, whether it was a Buddhist kingdom or a Zoroastrian stronghold. And while the romantic notion of a peaceful Silk Road might be a bit of a fairy tale, the Sogdians' ability to navigate its perils with a well-timed prayer or a politically savvy conversion was very much the real deal. But let's not get too misty-eyed. This wasn't some utopian experiment in multicultural harmony. The Sogdians were opportunists, and their religious syncretism was as much about leveraging economic and political advantages as it was about spiritual enlightenment. They understood that in a world where borders and allegiances shifted as often as desert dunes, having a spiritual ace up their sleeve was just good business sense. And so, as the Sogdian merchants journeyed from the bustling markets of Samarkand to the imperial courts of China, their religious identity was as diverse and adaptable as the goods they traded. They didn't just carry silk and spices. They transported ideas, beliefs, and philosophies, weaving them into the rich tapestry of their cultural legacy. Whether they were lighting a Zoroastrian fire in a Buddhist monastery or invoking a local deity to bless their trade caravan, the Sogdians were the ultimate spiritual entrepreneurs, always ready to turn a new belief into a golden opportunity. In the grand narrative of history, the story of the Sogdians reminds us that religion, like trade, is often about finding common ground and making a deal that benefits everyone involved. It's about looking at the world, seeing its complexities, and saying, I can work with this. So, as we continue our journey through the Silk Road's winding paths and the Sogdians' intricate belief systems, remember, in the world of ancient trade and religion, flexibility wasn't just a virtue, it was a necessity, and the Sogdians were masters at playing the game. Now, let's zoom in on a couple of religious imports that hitched a ride along the Silk Road and found a cozy home in the spiritual buffet of Sogdiana, Manichaeism and Nestorian Christianity. Picture these belief systems as exotic spices tossed into an already simmering pot of religious stew. Each brought its own unique flavor to the Sogdian table, but not without a few twists and turns along the way. First up, Manichaeism, a religion that was as cosmopolitan as its founder, Mani, who was born in the 3rd century CE in what is now Iraq. Mani had a vision, and not the kind where you see yourself on a beach sipping pina coladas. His vision was a universal religion, blending elements from Zoroastrianism, Buddhism, and Christianity. Think of it as the theological equivalent of fusion cuisine. Mani's teachings spread like wildfire across the Persian Empire and beyond, making their way to the Sogdian heartland. But here's the catch. While Mani preached a dualistic world of light versus darkness, an eternal cosmic battle akin to an interstellar game of tug-of-war, the Sogdians had their own take. They adapted Manichaeism to fit their pragmatic worldview, emphasizing the parts that resonated with their existing beliefs. The Sogdians were less interested in Mani's grand cosmic narratives and more focused on practical benefits, like using religious gatherings to strengthen trade networks. After all, when your business model relies on connecting with as many people as possible, a shared belief system can be a powerful tool. Now, let's tackle a common misconception, that Manichaeism was the dominant religion in Sogdiana. Spoiler alert, it wasn't. While it certainly enjoyed a period of influence, it never quite unseated the heavyweight champion, Zoroastrianism. Manichaeism in Sogdiana was more like the hip new restaurant in town, popular for a time, but not the mainstay. Its decline was as much about external pressures, like persecution from neighboring powers, as it was about an internal shift back to more traditional beliefs. So, let's put that myth to bed. Manichaeism was a significant player, but never the headliner. Next on the list, Nestorian Christianity. This branch of Christianity was named after Nestorius, a 5th century archbishop of Constantinople, whose teachings on the nature of Christ found a receptive audience in the East. Unlike the more centralized and hierarchical structure of Roman Christianity, Nestorianism was decentralized, making it a good fit for the Sogdians' flexible approach to religion. The Sogdians welcomed Nestorian missionaries with open arms, or perhaps more accurately, with open market stalls. These missionaries weren't just peddling spiritual salvation. They were also savvy traders and skilled diplomats. The Sogdian version of Nestorian Christianity often included local customs, such as incorporating Zoroastrian fire rituals into Christian ceremonies. Talk about a divine mashup. And while we're at it, let's quash another myth, that Nestorian Christianity was a fleeting fad in Sogdiana. In reality, it persisted for centuries, leaving behind churches and communities that continued to thrive long after the Sogdian Empire faded into the annals of history. Beyond the religious syncretism, what's striking is how these spiritual imports played into the Sogdians' economic strategies. For the Sogdians, adopting elements of Manichaeism and Nestorian Christianity wasn't just about spiritual enlightenment, it was a shrewd business move. By aligning with these religions, they could forge alliances with distant communities, ensuring safe passage for their caravans and opening up new markets for their goods. In this way, religion and commerce were two sides of the same coin, each reinforcing the other in a symbiotic relationship that kept Sogdiana at the heart of the Silk Road. Now, let's peel back another layer of this historical onion. Why did these religions decline? The romantic narrative might suggest a dramatic fall from grace, but the reality is more nuanced. Political shifts, economic changes, and cultural assimilation all played a part. As the power dynamics of the region shifted, so too did the religious landscape, with old beliefs being subsumed by new ones. But here's the kicker. The Sogdians weren't passive victims of these changes. They adapted, as they always had, finding new ways to integrate and thrive in the ever-evolving tapestry of Central Asia. So there you have it, a tale of religious adaptation, economic savvy, and the enduring legacy of a people who knew how to make the most of their place in the world. As we continue our journey through the Sogdian saga, let's not lose sight of the bigger picture, how these ancient traders, with their eclectic beliefs and sharp business acumen, helped shape the course of history. Stay tuned, because there's a lot more to uncover about the vibrant, dynamic world of the Sogdians and their indelible mark on the Silk Road. Let's pivot from the Sogdian spiritual smorgasbord to the tangible expressions of their eclectic beliefs, religious art and architecture. Now, before you start yawning at the thought of dusty ruins and faded frescoes, hold that thought. In Sogdiana, art and architecture were more than just eye candy. They were the Instagram of their day, broadcasting power, status, and sometimes a cheeky bit of propaganda. First, let's talk temples. The Sogdian religious landscape was dotted with them, serving as more than sanctuaries for a quick prayer. These were the social hubs, the Starbucks of ancient times, if you will. Take the Panjaikan temples, for instance, a site that's been a treasure trove for archaeologists. Excavations revealed a sprawling complex dedicated to Zoroastrianism, complete with fire altars and intricate murals. These weren't your average wall doodles, either. They were rich tapestries of human figures, celestial beings, and mythological scenes, painted with a flair that would make even a modern-day muralist nod in approval. These murals weren't just for show, though. They were a visual encyclopedia, reflecting the Sogdians' multicultural ethos. Scenes depicted heroes from local lore, but you'd also spot influences from Persia, India, and China. It's like flipping through a magazine where every page tells a different story, yet somehow they all connect. And here's the kicker. The narratives often served a dual purpose. Yes, they illustrated religious beliefs, but they also reinforced political alliances and social hierarchies. It was art with an agenda, where a well-placed deity could signal allegiance to a powerful neighbor or cement a ruler's divine authority. Now, let's wander over to the architectural marvels that still have archaeologists buzzing. The city of Samarkand, another Sogdian jewel, was a showcase of architectural bravado. Picture palaces and temples adorned with stucco reliefs and vibrant frescoes, each structure a statement of wealth and influence. The Sogdians were masters at blending styles, borrowing elements from their trade partners and melding them into something uniquely their own. You had Persian columns, Indian motifs, and Chinese roof tiles, all coexisting in a harmonious jumble. It was a bit like a game of architectural Tetris, where every piece fit together to create something greater than the sum of its parts. And here's a nugget to chew on. The very act of constructing these buildings was a display of power. In a world where most structures were mud brick hovels, erecting a temple or palace from stone was like driving a Rolls-Royce through a sea of hatchbacks. It was a declaration of political clout and economic prowess, a way to flex your muscles without saying a word. The Sogdians understood this, and they played the game with finesse, ensuring their cities were not just functional trading hubs, but also architectural symbols of their regional dominance. Of course, the art and architecture weren't just about flexing for the neighbors. They also had deep social implications. These spaces were where community life unfolded, where people gathered for festivals, trade, and the occasional gossip session. Think of them as the original town squares, buzzing with activity and alive with the sounds of daily life. The temples and palaces were the backdrop, providing the stage for the grand theater of Sogdian society, where every fresco and column whispered stories of the past while shaping the future. But let's smash a myth or two while we're here. The popular image of ancient art as purely decorative misses the mark entirely. In Sogdiana, it was a powerful communication tool, a way to broadcast messages across the cultural and linguistic barriers of the Silk Road. And let's be real, when you're trying to negotiate trade deals in a dozen different languages, a well-placed mural can speak volumes. Speaking of myth-busting, let's clear up the notion that these grand structures were always revered and preserved. In reality, the sands of time and the whims of political change often led to their neglect or repurposing. Some became makeshift fortresses, others were plundered for materials, and a few even served as the backdrop for less than holy activities. It's a reminder that while the art and architecture of the Sogdians were grand, they were also as vulnerable to the ravages of time and history as any of us. And now, a shout-out to the unsung heroes of this historical narrative, the archaeologists. Without their relentless digging and deciphering, the vibrant tapestry of Sogdian art and architecture would remain buried beneath layers of sand and stone. Thanks to their efforts, we have a window into a world where art was more than just aesthetics. It was a dynamic force, shaping and reflecting the culture, politics, and spirituality of an entire civilization. So, as we continue to peel back the layers of Sogdian society, let's appreciate the richness of their artistic legacy. It's a testament to their ingenuity, adaptability, and the enduring power of cultural expression. More than mere decoration, it was a tool of influence, a marker of identity, and a bridge connecting the diverse peoples of the Silk Road. In the grand chessboard of history, the Sogdians played their pieces with flair and strategy, using art and architecture as much as trade and diplomacy. As we delve deeper into their story, remember that every mural, every temple, and every fresco was a chapter in the ongoing saga of a people who knew how to turn the mundane into the magnificent. Stay tuned. There's still more to uncover about the colorful, complex world of the Sogdians and their indelible impact on the Silk Road. As we untangle the threads of Sogdian history, it's time to zoom out and see how their religious kaleidoscope and trade prowess continue to ripple through the ages. Picture the Silk Road not as a relic of the past, but as the ancestor of global networks today. The Sogdians didn't just peddle silk and spices. They were the original globalizers, shaping a world where currency wasn't just coins but culture and ideas. Let's talk about legacy, that term historians love to throw around. For the Sogdians, it's not just about who they were, but what they left behind, a blueprint for cultural syncretism. Their eclectic religious practices were less about spiritual tourism and more about survival in a harsh geopolitical landscape. By embracing a smorgasbord of beliefs, they crafted a society that could pivot and adapt faster than a cat on a hot tin roof. This adaptability, fueled by necessity rather than idealism, is something modern societies might take a cue from. After all, in today's global village, where borders are digital and alliances shift like desert sands, a bit of Sogdian flexibility could go a long way. But let's not get too misty-eyed or start carving marble statues for the Sogdians just yet. The Silk Road was no peace train. It was a high-stakes chess game played with real lives and fortunes. The Sogdians were shrewd operators in this arena, not saints with a penchant for multicultural comebacks. They were practical, sometimes ruthlessly so, using religion as a tool to grease the wheels of trade and diplomacy. Their syncretic approach, while admirable, was also a survival strategy in a world where neutrality was a luxury few could afford. Fast forward to today, and you'll find echoes of Sogdian ingenuity in our global trade networks. We might not be bartering with silk or praying to fire altars, but the principles of cultural exchange and economic interdependence remain. The Sogdians were early adopters of a global mindset, understanding that prosperity lay not in isolation, but in connection. This resonates in our era of globalization, where understanding and adapting to diverse cultures is not just advantageous, but essential. The Sogdian legacy also lives on in the art and architecture that continue to inspire modern design. Their ability to blend styles from different cultures is reflected in today's architectural feats that borrow from a myriad of influences to create something new and exciting. So, the next time you marvel at a building that seems to defy cultural categorization, tip your hat to the Sogdians who mastered this art centuries ago. But let's dive into some hard facts. The Sogdians operated at the height of their power from the 6th to the 8th century CE, a time when the world was a patchwork of empires and warring factions. They thrived not by brute force, but by economic cunning, transforming their geographic predicament into a strategic advantage. By the time the Islamic caliphates rose to prominence, the Sogdians had already laid the groundwork for a world where trade and cultural exchange were intertwined. And what about their religious legacy? While Zoroastrianism, Buddhism, and Nestorian Christianity have evolved or faded, the spirit of religious tolerance and integration the Sogdians practiced is a valuable lesson for today's world. In an age where religious and cultural divides often seem insurmountable, the Sogdians remind us that coexistence is not just possible, but profitable, if you play your cards right. In the grand narrative of human history, the Sogdians are a reminder that adaptability and pragmatism can be as powerful as any army. They didn't just survive the tumult of the Silk Road, they thrived by turning chaos into opportunity. So, the next time you hear someone wax lyrical about the romanticism of the Silk Road, remember that behind the myth was a gritty reality navigated by savvy traders with a knack for turning a profit and a prayer into a powerful legacy. In wrapping up our Sogdian saga, let's not forget the irony that their very success in blending cultures and beliefs may have sown the seeds of their cultural dilution. As empires rose and fell, so too did the prominence of the Sogdians, absorbed into the larger tapestry of history. Yet their story endures, a testament to the power of cultural fusion and economic acumen in shaping the world. So, as you drift off to sleep tonight, pondering the distant echoes of camel caravans and vibrant bazaars, remember the Sogdians, not just as relics of the past, but as pioneers of the globalized world we live in today. A world where the lines between cultures blur and blend, echoing the symphony of diversity the Sogdians orchestrated on the Silk Road. In the end, their legacy is not just about the roads they traveled, but the bridges they built, bridges that continue to connect us all in ways both seen and unseen. Athens in the 5th century BCE was the kind of place that didn't just dabble in drama, it practically invented it. Picture a city buzzing with philosophers, politicians, and yes, a fair share of gossiping citizens, all contributing to a cultural hub that was the envy of the ancient world. Think of it as the Hollywood of its time, minus the sunglasses and red carpets, but with plenty of togas and sandals. In the center of this bustling metropolis stood the theater of Dionysus, a colossal amphitheater that could seat an eye-popping 17,000 spectators. That's nearly the population of a small modern town crammed into one venue, all there to witness the latest tragic or comedic masterpiece. The theater itself was a marvel of ancient engineering. Carved into the southern slope of the Acropolis, it offered not only a visual feast on stage, but also panoramic views of Athens. Talk about a backdrop. The design was all about acoustics, ensuring that even the ancient equivalent of the nosebleed seats got a good earful of Oedipus's latest woes. And let's not forget the stone seats, which were probably as comfortable as you'd expect from a civilization that hadn't quite invented cushions yet. But hey, when you're there to see Aeschylus or Sophocles, you make do. Now, let's chat about who actually got to sit where, because seating wasn't just about finding the best view, it was a political statement. The best seats were reserved for the top dogs, the city officials, priests, and international dignitaries, who got to sit in the front rows. This was ancient Greece's version of a VIP box, minus the complimentary champagne. These prime spots were known as the prohedria, and sitting there was as much about being seen as it was about seeing the play. In a society that worshipped public debate and civic engagement, being on display was practically a sport. Meanwhile, the average Athenian citizen, assuming he was male and not a slave, could snag a seat anywhere else, as long as he arrived early enough. No need for Ticketmaster here. Just bring your own cushion if you plan to survive the marathon performances, which could last all day. Women, slaves, and foreigners had a less straightforward path to these cultural gatherings, often relegated to the margins or excluded entirely. Talk about a tough ticket. The democratic nature of the theatre was a reflection of the broader political climate in Athens, where the idea of democracy was not just a buzzword but a lifestyle. Yet this was no utopia. The city was rife with political intrigue, and the theatre was a prime venue for pushing boundaries and challenging norms. Playwrights wielded their pens like weapons, weaving stories that critiqued the powers that be under the guise of entertainment. In fact, the theatre was one of the few places where criticism of authority could be aired publicly, albeit wrapped in layers of allegory and metaphor. It was both a cultural event and a kind of ancient societal barometer, where one could gauge public sentiment without a modern-day opinion poll. The socio-political context of these performances was as layered as the plays themselves. Athens was a city-state that prided itself on its intellectual and artistic achievements, but it was also heavily involved in warfare and territorial expansion. The Peloponnesian War loomed large over this era, casting a shadow over the artistic endeavors. Theatre offered a cathartic release, a way to process collective anxieties and aspirations, even as the city grappled with the realities of war and political discord. In this world, playwrights became celebrities in their works, cultural touchstones. The likes of Aristophanes, Euripides, and Sophocles were not merely entertainers. They were commentators and critics, their plays reflecting both the grandeur and the grit of Athenian society. Through satire and tragedy, they explored themes of power, justice, and the human condition, leaving audiences with much to ponder long after the curtain, figurative, of course, fell. So there you have it, ancient Greek theatre, a spectacle of civic pride and artistic prowess, where the seat you snagged said as much about your social standing as the debates you engaged in after the show. A place where democracy and drama collided, and where, for a few hours, the citizens of Athens could escape into stories that mirrored their own lives and the world around them. As much as we romanticize these early days of theatre, it's worth remembering that the performances were as much a reflection of society's imperfections as they were a celebration of its cultural heights. And speaking of the world around them, let's peel back the curtain on the nitty-gritty of Greek theatre production. First up, the playwrights, the rock stars of ancient Athens. You couldn't throw an amphora without hitting a name like Sophocles or Euripides, and for good reason. These guys weren't just slinging quills. They were crafting narratives that still resonate today, and they did it all without the aid of a laptop or even a humble typewriter. Sophocles, for instance, was quite the overachiever. He penned more than 120 plays, though only 7 have survived the ravages of time. Imagine that hit rate. Meanwhile, Euripides was the edgy provocateur, often pushing the boundaries of what was considered acceptable. If you think modern playwrights are controversial, Euripides was doing it first, and without the safety net of social media to amplify his dissent. But crafting these masterpieces was only half the story. Turning a script into a full-blown production took more than just creative genius. It required cold, hard drachmas. Enter the Korgos, the unsung heroes of the theatrical world. These were the wealthy patrons who bankrolled the entire shebang, covering costs like sets, costumes, and the all-important chorus. And let's face it, no one did civic duty quite like the Korgos. For them, funding a theatrical production was as much about contributing to the cultural life of Athens as it was about showing off their own wealth and influence. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of having your name on a university building, but with a bit more drama. Literally. Let's talk numbers, because who doesn't love a little economic analysis in their history lesson? Funding a production could set a Korgos back anywhere from 3,000 to 10,000 drachmas, a hefty sum considering the average Athenian laborer was making just 1 drachma a day. That's like throwing down the equivalent of a new sports car or even a small house, all for the sake of art. and maybe a bit of ego, too. The financial burden didn't fall on the actors, though. Nope, these thespians had their hands full with memorizing lines and perfecting their masks. Ah, masks, those iconic symbols of Greek theatre. They're practically synonymous with the art form, and for good reason. These were not just any old disguises. They were transformative tools that allowed actors to switch characters and genders with ease. We're talking about a time when all roles, including female ones, were played by men. So, masks were not just a creative choice. They were a necessity. Crafted from lightweight materials like linen or cork, these masks were painted with exaggerated expressions to convey emotions from afar. Remember, subtlety wasn't exactly an option when your audience was seated in row 500. But beyond practicality, these masks also added a layer of mystique and universality to the performances. They allowed the audience to project their own interpretations onto the characters, making the experience both personal and communal. And then there were the costumes, equally elaborate and symbolic. Forget simple tunics. These were grand, colorful garments that helped distinguish characters and social statuses on stage. Royalty might be clad in purple, while a commoner would don humble earth tones. Costumes were more than just eye candy. They were visual cues that helped the audience navigate complex narratives. But who were these productions really for? Spoiler alert, it wasn't just the ticket-buying public. The Athenian elite took great pride in these cultural spectacles, seeing them as a reflection of their city's sophistication and power. It was all part of the larger competitive spirit in Athens, where even art was a contest. Playwrights and choirgoi vied for prestige and prizes, with festivals like the city Dionysia offering accolades to those who wowed the crowd. Winning was not just about personal glory, it was a matter of civic pride. Behind the scenes, though, things were less glamorous. The logistics of staging a play involved a small army of workers. From set builders to musicians, a production was a community effort. And let's not forget the chorus, the unsung heroes who sang, danced, and narrated the story. While the actors had the spotlight, the chorus provided the backbone of the performance, often commenting on the action and guiding the audience's emotions. The role of the choirgos was crucial here. They didn't just sign the checks, they were actively involved in the process, sometimes even participating in the chorus themselves. It was a hands-on role, blending philanthropy with personal investment. And while the choirgos might not have received a direct return on their financial outlay, the social capital gained was invaluable. In a society where public perception was everything, sponsoring a successful play could elevate one's status to new heights. Yet, let's not romanticize it too much. While theater was a democratic art form in some respects, it was also a playground of privilege. A choirgos could use their role to curry favor with the political elite or to bolster their own political ambitions. It was a delicate dance of art, power, and money, a tale as old as time. So, there you have it, the unvarnished reality behind the dazzling facade of Greek theatre. It was a world where art and politics were inseparable, where the line between civic duty and personal gain was as blurred as a poorly painted backdrop. But for all its complexities, it was a cultural phenomenon that laid the groundwork for modern theatre. It's a testament to human creativity and ambition, as relevant today as it was over 2 millennia ago. Stay tuned as we continue to unravel the multifaceted world of ancient Greek theatre, where the next act promises even more drama, both on and off the stage. As we dive deeper into the backstage chaos of Greek theatre, let's unravel the grand spectacle that was the Dionysia Festival. Picture this, an event so epic it makes the Super Bowl look like a backyard barbecue. We're talking about a festival that wasn't just a cultural highlight. It was a cornerstone of Athenian life, as essential as olive oil and heated political debates. The city Dionysia, named after Dionysus, the god of wine, fertility, and all things theatrical, was the big cheese of festivals. Held every March, right as the weather teased the first inklings of spring, the festival was a week-long marathon of dramatic presentations. It was a theatrical triathlon, except instead of swimming, biking, and running, you had tragedy, comedy, and satyr plays. Each year, 3 playwrights were chosen to present a tetralogy, 3 tragedies, and a comedic satyr play, making it a total of 12 intense performances. Imagine a Netflix binge-watch session, but live, and without the ability to pause for snacks. Let's get into the nitty-gritty logistics, because organizing this festival was no small feat. The responsibility fell to the archon, the city's chief magistrate, who selected the participating playwrights and their financial backers, the Korgoi. This was like being the head of a major awards show, but with a much riskier guest list. One false move, and you could find yourself at the mercy of a scathing Aristophanic satire. As the festival kicked off, Athens transformed into a buzzing hive of anticipation. The streets teemed with visitors from all corners of the Greek world, eager to witness the dramatic spectacles. It was an economic bonanza, with merchants hawking everything from fine pottery to street food, ancient souvlaki, anyone. But beyond the hustle and bustle, the real heart of the festival was the competition. This was the Olympics of drama, where playwrights weren't just crafting stories. They were fighting for immortality, their reputations teetering on the edge of a tragic downfall or comedic triumph. Winning at the Dionysia wasn't a matter of mere personal glory. It was a societal accolade. In a culture that revered honor and fame, victory was a ticket to the halls of greatness, a chance to be remembered long after the last actor left the stage. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of going viral, but with more gravitas and fewer cat videos. Now, let's talk about the judges. Selected by lot, these were ordinary citizens, tasked with the unenviable role of deciding which playwright would take home the laurel. It was a high-pressure gig. Imagine being a judge on a talent show where the contestants were the likes of Aeschylus and Sophocles. The judging process was an exercise in democracy, with each judge dropping a pebble into an urn to cast their vote. But here's the twist. Only 5 of the 10 votes were randomly pulled and counted, adding an element of chance to the outcome. It was democracy with a side of suspense, a reminder that even in a society that prized order and logic, fate still liked to play its hand. Of course, where there's competition, there's bound to be a bit of mischief. Rumor had it that some playwrights, or their enthusiastic backers, weren't above greasing a few palms to tip the scales in their favor. Bribery and influence peddling were the whispered secrets of the festival, the backstage drama matching anything happening on stage. In a world where public honor was the currency of the realm, securing a win could justify the means, no matter how dubious. The playwrights themselves were akin to modern-day celebrities, each vying for the adoration of the crowd and the approval of the judges. Aeschylus, for instance, was the patriarch of tragedy, a master of the grand narrative. His plays were like epic poems brought to life, rich with themes of fate and vengeance. Euripides, on the other hand, was the maverick, the one unafraid to question societal norms and present the gods as flawed beings. His work often sparked controversy, much to the delight of audiences hungry for drama both on and off the stage. The stakes were high, and the festival schedule was grueling. Imagine sitting through 3 tragedies back-to-back, only to be jolted awake by a boisterous satyr play, replete with bawdy humor and slapstick antics. It was emotional whiplash by design, a roller coaster of pathos and comedy that left audiences exhausted yet exhilarated. For the playwrights, the Dionysia was a proving ground, a chance to showcase their craft and push the boundaries of storytelling. Their works were not merely entertainment, they were reflections of the human condition, exploring themes of power, morality, and the gods' inscrutable will. Through allegory and metaphor, these plays held up a mirror to Athenian society, challenging audiences to ponder the deeper questions of existence. Yet, for all its cultural glory, the festival was also a stark reminder of the societal hierarchies at play. While the theatre welcomed citizens with open arms, it was still a domain of privilege. Slaves, women, and foreigners found themselves on the fringes of this cultural celebration, their voices largely absent from the artistic discourse. It was a microcosm of Athenian democracy, where the ideal of equality often clashed with the reality of exclusion. Despite these contradictions, the Dionysia remained a testament to the enduring power of theatre, a celebration of human creativity and resilience. It was a moment when the boundaries of the possible were stretched, when storytellers dared to dream and audiences were invited to join them in that dream. As we wrap up this act of our historical odyssey, remember this. Greek theatre was more than just a series of plays. It was an expression of the human spirit, a dance between the divine and the mundane. And while its legacy may be enshrined in marble and texts, the true magic lies in the fleeting moments of connection between actor and audience, a shared experience that transcends time and space. Stay tuned, because there's still more to explore in the world of ancient Greek theatre. In the next part, we'll delve into the enduring influence of these dramatic spectacles and how they laid the groundwork for the evolution of theatre as we know it today. It's a journey through time, where the echoes of ancient voices still resonate in the theatres of the modern world. The echoes of ancient voices still resonate in the theatres of the modern world, but let's pivot from the grand narratives to the nitty-gritty of the performances themselves. Picture this, a stage where actors faced trials that would make even the most seasoned Oscar-winning thespian break into a nervous sweat. Forget spotlights and surround sound. These guys had to project their voices across a sea of up to 17,000 spectators without so much as a megaphone or a wireless mic. Their secret weapon, a voice powerful enough to shame an opera singer into retirement. The actors, known as hypocrites, weren't just playing roles. They were embodying them, often with the help of those iconic masks. Now, if you're imagining a delicate masquerade ball mask, think again. These were contraptions made from lightweight materials like linen or cork, painted with exaggerated expressions to convey emotion from the very last row. Subtlety was not in their vocabulary. And given that all roles, whether guards, heroes, or damsels, were portrayed by men, these masks were crucial in bridging the gender gap on stage. Talk about a gender-bending performance. Now, let's address the elephant, or should I say olive, in the room: gender dynamics. In a society that often relegated women to the private sphere, theatre was a rare public space where their stories could be told, albeit through male voices and bodies. It was a paradox of sorts, men portraying women in narratives that often critiqued the very patriarchal structures they were a part of. Imagine a 5th century BCE version of Tootsie, but with more tragedy and fewer laughs. But don't let the masks fool you. They were both a blessing and a curse. While they allowed actors to switch roles with a flick of the wrist, they also limited facial expressions, meaning actors had to rely heavily on body language and vocal prowess to convey the nuances of their characters. And with all that emoting, it's no wonder their performances were the ancient equivalent of a full-body workout. Forget CrossFit. Try a day in the life of a Greek actor. As for the audience, they were anything but passive spectators, engaged with the drama unfolding before them with the kind of fervor you'd expect at a modern sports match. Booing, cheering, and yes, even throwing olives were all part of the deal. Imagine being pelted with olives because your rendition of Oedipus didn't quite hit the mark. Talk about adding insult to injury. But hey, at least it wasn't tomatoes. Yet, the audience's reactions were more than just visceral responses. They were a reflection of the democratic ethos of Athens. Theatre was a place where citizens could express approval or dissent, where public sentiment was laid bare for all to see. It was less about passive consumption and more about communal engagement, a form of participatory art that mirrored the political life of the city. So, when an actor received a standing ovation or a shower of olives, it was a barometer of public opinion, a snapshot of the collective mood. Now, let's not paint too rosy a picture. The social dynamics at play were as complex as the plot of a Sophoclean tragedy. While male citizens enjoyed the best seats in the house, women, slaves, and foreigners were often left to the margins, both physically and metaphorically. It was a microcosm of Athenian society, where the ideals of democracy and equality were often at odds with the realities of exclusion and hierarchy. But for all its flaws, Greek theatre was a cultural phenomenon that transcended social barriers, at least in spirit. It was a space where stories of human folly and divine intervention played out, where the lines between actor and audience blurred in a shared experience of catharsis. It was a place where the past and present collided, where the ghosts of ancient myths were resurrected to illuminate the human condition. So, as we continue our journey through the world of Greek theatre, remember this. Behind the masks and the melodrama, there was a vibrant tapestry of human experience, a testament to the enduring power of storytelling. And though the actors may have been mere men in masks, their performances were anything but ordinary. They were an exploration of identity, a dance between fate and free will, a celebration of the complexities and contradictions that make us human. Stay tuned, because the next act promises even more revelations. We'll dive deeper into the societal impact of these performances, exploring how they shaped the cultural and political landscape of ancient Athens. It's a journey through time, where the stage was both a mirror and a window, reflecting the world as it was and as it could be. As we continue our journey through the world of Greek theatre, it's time to peel back the layers of myth and reality to understand its profound impact on modern storytelling. If you've ever sat through a Shakespearean tragedy or a Hollywood blockbuster, you felt the ripples of ancient Greek drama. Let's start with the structure of plays. The Greeks practically wrote the rulebook. Ever noticed how modern plays and films often follow a three-act structure? You can thank Aeschylus and his buddies for that one. Those early playwrights were the original masters of narrative pacing, crafting stories that moved from setup to conflict to resolution with a precision that would make a Swiss watch blush. And then there are the archetypes, the heroes, the villains, the tragic flaws that have become the bedrock of storytelling. The Greeks served up characters like Oedipus, who, despite his best efforts, couldn't outmaneuver fate, and Medea, who took the concept of revenge to a whole new level. These archetypes have been recycled, reimagined, and rehashed more times than a pop song chorus. They're the original templates, the blueprints for characters in everything from soap operas to superhero flicks. But let's not romanticize these ancient tales too much. Sure, Greek theatre gave us timeless stories and unforgettable characters, but it was also a reflection of a society rife with contradictions and complexities. Behind the poetic dialogues and dramatic masks was a world where theatre was both a tool of enlightenment and a vehicle for reinforcing social hierarchies. While the plays often critiqued the status quo, they were still performed in a society where only free male citizens could truly enjoy the democratic ideals celebrated on stage. Women and slaves, ironically, were relegated to the periphery, both in life and in the theatre. Yet, despite these societal limitations, the cultural and educational significance of Greek theatre was immense. It was more than just entertainment. It was an exercise in civic engagement and critical thinking. The theatre was a forum where complex moral and philosophical questions were posed, and audiences were encouraged to ponder their own beliefs and values. In a world without Twitter debates or YouTube comment sections, theatre was the ancient version of a TED talk, challenging audiences to think deeply and critically. Now, let's tackle some myths. The romantic notion of Greek theatre often paints it as a bastion of high-minded art and intellectual discourse. But the reality was a little more down-to-earth. Sure, some plays were philosophical masterpieces, but others were filled with slapstick humor and crude jokes that would make a modern stand-up comedian blush. Aristophanes, for instance, was the king of satire, skewering everything from politics to societal norms with a wit sharper than a Spartan spear. And let's not forget the satyr plays, which were essentially ancient comedy sketches with enough bawdy humor to rival any late-night TV show. Despite these less-than-lofty elements, the legacy of Greek theatre is undeniable. It laid the groundwork for the evolution of theatre as we know it today, influencing everything from narrative structure to thematic exploration. Modern storytelling, whether on stage or screen, owes a debt of gratitude to those ancient playwrights who dared to dream and innovate. As we wrap up this exploration of ancient Greek theatre, it's worth reflecting on its enduring legacy. The themes and narratives crafted over 2 millennia ago still resonate, proving that while the world has changed, human nature remains remarkably constant. We're still drawn to stories that explore the complexities of the human condition, that challenge us to question our beliefs and values. In the end, theatre is a shared experience, a place where stories come alive and connect us through the ages. Despite the technological advancements and cultural shifts over the millennia, the core of theatre, a communal space for storytelling and reflection, remains unchanged. So next time you find yourself in a theatre, whether it's a grand Broadway production or a local community playhouse, remember that you're part of a tradition that stretches back to the amphitheaters of ancient Greece. It's a testament to the enduring power of stories to transcend time, space, and cultural boundaries, reminding us of our shared humanity and the timeless nature of the tales we tell. Your eyes flutter open to the sound of wind whistling through the gaps in your castle's stone walls, or perhaps the flapping of your tent's canvas if you're closer to the action. Either way, it's a drafty morning in the world of medieval knighthood, where the romance of chivalry meets the reality of cold feet. As you blink away sleep, you can't help but ponder the irony of how this life of noble service and piety starts with such a mundane inconvenience. the eternal quest for warmth. Welcome to the life of a Crusader knight, where your morning routine is a curious blend of the venerable and the vexing. First things first, the armor. Darning your chainmail and plate isn't exactly like slipping on your favorite pair of jeans. It's more akin to strapping on a second, less forgiving skin. A typical set can weigh anywhere from 45 to 60 pounds, which is basically like carrying a squirming child on your back at all times. But hey, at least you're not in the full plate armor of later centuries. That's a small mercy for your spine. As your squire helps you into this metallic cocoon, you're reminded that the privilege of having a young lad serve you isn't merely about status. It's a practical necessity. You've got layers to contend with, and doing it solo isn't an option unless you've got a few extra arms hidden under that tunic. Your squire, perhaps a young noble himself, is learning the chivalric ropes. Think of him as an intern, minus the coffee runs, plus the chainmail polish. Speaking of which, the cost of maintaining this knightly lifestyle would make any sensible accountant weep. Armor alone could set you back the equivalent of a small village annual income. We're talking anywhere from 36 to 80 pounds sterling for a quality set. And that's excluding the horses, because yes, you need more than one. Your trusty steed for battle is complemented by a pack horse for the luggage. It's a full medieval convoy, really. This financial burden is a heavy one. Knights aren't just warriors. They're also landlords, responsible for overseeing an estate that funds their martial exploits. As a vassal, you're obligated to provide military service to your liege lord, often in exchange for land. But don't think of this as a cozy cottage and a garden patch. This is a full-blown feudal enterprise. You're the CEO of your own medieval startup, with peasants instead of employees, and instead of quarterly reports, it's all about how many crops you can coax out of the earth. There's a myth that knights were all about glory and honor, but let's not forget the bottom line. The Crusades were as much about economics as they were about faith. Lands in the Holy Land were the medieval equivalent of beachfront property, and everyone wanted a slice. Sure, the Pope might have promised salvation for those who took up the cross, but the potential for new lands and titles was a pretty tempting carrot, too. As you strap on your sword, it's worth noting that this is not just a weapon, but a symbol of your status and duty. It's your medieval Swiss Army knife, capable of slicing, dicing, and keeping you alive in a pinch. Yet behind this gleaming exterior lies the reality that every swing, every clash, comes with a cost. Replacing a sword could cost you around 6 to 8 pounds sterling, a price tag that might make you think twice before engaging in some chivalrous melee. By now, you're probably wondering how anyone could keep up with these expenses. Here's the secret sauce. Leverage your land effectively, maintain good relations with your liege, and hope your crops don't fail. Also, pray you don't get called up for too many campaigns, because being away for long periods can leave your estate vulnerable to mismanagement, or worse, seizure. As you finish your preparations and head out into the chilly morning air, you might reflect on the peculiar balance of knightly life, a fusion of martial prowess, financial acumen, and a touch of divine intervention. The reality of the Crusades is a far cry from the romanticized vision of knights in shining armor, galloping off into a sunset of noble deeds. It's a world where the clang of metal is as common as the rustle of parchment, and where the drive for economic gain is as potent as any call to arms. Setting off to join your fellow knights, you can almost hear the whispers of history reminding you that the path of chivalry is paved with both valor and spreadsheets. And as you ride out, ready to face the day, you know that beneath the gleaming surface of your armor lies the true weight of a knight's life. With your armor clinking like a medieval percussion section, you set off to embrace the day's demands. But before the trumpets of battle sound, let's talk training. Forget the Hollywood montage of knights effortlessly swinging swords and saving damsels. Becoming a knight is more grueling boot camp than fairy tale. First up, the art of horsemanship. If you thought riding a horse was as easy as harping on a bicycle, think again. These aren't just any horses. They're your medieval battle tanks, known as destriers, and they're as costly as they are crucial. Training begins in childhood, around age 7, when you'd be packed off to live with another noble family. Here, you'd learn to ride, starting on a palfrey, a more docile breed, before graduating to the powerful destriers. Mastering the art of staying on your horse while swinging a sword requires the kind of core strength that would make a modern personal trainer weep with envy. Every morning, you'd start with hours of rigorous exercises, vaulting onto your horse in full armor, leaning sideways to strike a target, and riding with no hands. Think of it as equestrian yoga with a side of adrenaline. The stakes, high. Losing your seat in battle could mean a swift end, not just a bruised ego. And let's not even mention the embarrassment of falling off in front of your peers. It's the medieval equivalent of tripping on the red carpet. Now, let's gallop over to the noble sport of jousting. Ah, jousting, the ultimate test of skill, strength, and how well you can hold your dinner after being hit at full tilt by another armored human cannonball. It's not just about charging at your opponent with a lance. It's about precision, timing, and a little bit of luck. A successful joust requires a perfectly angled strike to unseat your opponent while maintaining your own balance. It's a delicate dance of destruction that could easily end with you eating dirt. But here's the kicker. Jousts are as much about social climbing as they are about skill. These tournaments were the medieval Instagram, a place to see and be seen. Winning at a tournament could catapult you into the spotlight, earning you fame and potentially a lucrative marriage proposal. But the costs were astronomical. Entry fees, travel expenses, and potential damage to your precious armor could drain your coffers faster than a banquet with the king. And heaven forbid you break a lance. That could set you back a small fortune, somewhere around 20 shillings. Tournaments were political minefields, too. They offered a rare chance to rub shoulders with the high and mighty, to forge alliances or rivalries. Making the right connections could lead to wealth and power. The wrong ones could leave you disgraced and impoverished. It's a high-stakes game with everything to play for and everything to lose. The romance of the joust is undeniable, with its colorful pennants and cheering crowds. Yet behind the pageantry lies the harsh reality that one false move could leave you penniless or maimed. There's a reason they called it friendly competition. You were just as likely to get skewered by a friend as a foe. And despite the promise of glory, the risk of physical ruin was ever present. A broken limb was a best-case scenario. A misjudged lance strike could mean a swift trip to the afterlife. As the day winds on, you might find yourself reflecting on how the life of a knight is a constant balancing act. Training and tournaments are just part of the tapestry. Every joust and every skirmish is a reminder of the thin line between hero and has-been. It's not just your physical prowess being tested, but your ability to navigate the treacherous waters of medieval society. So, as you ride through the day, remember that the gleam of your armor is both a shield and a burden, a testament to the weight of expectations resting on your shoulders. The legend of the knight may be forged in the furnace of combat and competition, but the reality is tempered by the grind of endless training, the sharp edge of financial ruin, and the relentless pursuit of glory. And while the stories tell of noble deeds and gallant heroes, it's the grit and grind behind the scenes that truly defines the life of a knight on the Crusades. The sun begins to dip on the horizon, casting long shadows as you prepare to retire for the evening. But remember, the day isn't truly over. There's always another challenge looming, another chance to prove your mettle. In this world, every dawn brings a new opportunity to ride out and make your mark. So sleep well, and prepare to do it all over again tomorrow. As you watch the sun dip below the horizon, casting its golden glow over the camp, let's pivot to the midday madness of medieval politics. The Crusades, sold to you as a holy quest to reclaim sacred lands, but often feeling more like a chaotic medieval road trip with a side of geopolitical chess. Buckle up, because navigating this labyrinthine political landscape is as tricky as keeping your chainmail rust-free in a rainstorm. First, let's talk papal decrees, those divine directives that had knights like you donning armor and heading eastward. The Pope, the spiritual big cheese of the time, wielded immense influence, and his word was as good as gospel. When Pope Urban Roman II delivered his electrifying sermon at Clermont in 1095, he didn't just call for a crusade. He lit the fuse on a powder keg of pent-up ambitions and rivalries. The Pope promised remission of sins for those who joined the fight, a spiritual carrot that was hard to ignore, especially when the alternative was eternal damnation. But let's not kid ourselves. Sin forgiveness wasn't the only lure. There were rumors of the riches of the East, fertile lands, and opportunities for glory that made any knight's heart beat a little faster. Now, while the Pope might have been the Crusade's spiritual figurehead, The reality on the ground was far messier. Picture this, a smorgasbord of noble egos, each with their own agendas, all trying to squeeze through the narrow gates of Jerusalem. You had kings, dukes, and counts, each with an eye on expanding their influence and territories. The First Crusade was less a united front and more a series of overlapping personal quests, with knights and nobles banding together, or clashing, depending on the day's politics. Let's not gloss over the logistics, either. Marching across Europe and into the Holy Land wasn't a stroll in the park. It was more like a grueling odyssey with supply lines stretched thinner than a pauper's purse. Imagine trying to feed an army of thousands while traversing hostile lands, with local rulers less than thrilled to have a heavily armed entourage traipsing across their territories. The cost of this endeavor was staggering. Estimates suggest that outfitting a single knight for the journey could cost upwards of 4 times their annual income, and that's before factoring in the costs of feeding and maintaining their retinue along the way. The myth of the noble, selfless crusader is a compelling one, yet the truth is often more complex. Some knights did indeed set out with pure intentions, driven by faith and the promise of salvation. But for many, the Crusades were an opportunity to gain wealth, land, and importantly, a place in the annals of history. The Holy Land was the medieval equivalent of a new world, ripe for conquest, full of resources, and offering a fresh start for younger sons who wouldn't inherit their family estates. But here comes the curveball, the cultural clash. The Crusaders weren't just marching into battle. They were plunging headfirst into a world vastly different from their own. Eastern cities like Antioch and Jerusalem were melting parts of cultures, languages, and religions, an exotic tapestry that could bewilder and intrigue a knight used to the more monochrome palette of northern Europe. The interactions between Crusaders and the local populations were fraught with tension and misunderstanding. While some knights marveled at the sophistication of eastern cities, others found themselves in over their heads, struggling with the sheer complexity of navigating these foreign societies. And just when you think you've got a handle on things, enter the Byzantine Empire, a powerhouse of political intrigue and a constant wild card in the Crusader playbook. The Byzantines, led by shrewd emperors like Alexios I Komnenos, viewed the Crusades with a mix of hope and suspicion, seeing the potential for both support against their own enemies and the risk of a Western power grab. The relationship between the Crusaders and the Byzantines was a delicate dance, fraught with mistrust and opportunism. Alliances were as fluid as quicksand, with each side constantly evaluating the other's intentions. As you trudge through this political quagmire, it's worth noting the sheer endurance required of knights during these campaigns. The physical toll was punishing, marches that stretched hundreds of miles, battles fought under a scorching sun, and the constant threat of disease. Dysentery, not the sword, was often the grim reaper on these expeditions. Yet despite the hardships, the allure of the Crusades endured, a testament to the powerful mix of faith, ambition, and human folly. So, as you sit by the campfire, contemplating the day's events, remember that the Crusades were as much about navigating the murky waters of medieval politics as they were about wielding a sword. Every decision, every alliance, was a roll of the dice in a game where the stakes were often life and death. And while the legends might tell of heroic deeds and divine missions, the reality was a complex tapestry of ambition, faith, and the relentless quest for power. As the night deepens and the stars twinkle above, you know that tomorrow will bring yet more challenges and opportunities. The path of a knight in the Crusades is never straightforward, but it is always an adventure. So rest well, for who knows what the next day will bring in this ever-unfolding saga of history. As the night deepens and the stars twinkle above, you know that tomorrow will bring yet more challenges and opportunities. The path of a knight in the Crusades is never straightforward, but it is always an adventure. So rest well, for who knows what the next day will bring in this ever-unfolding saga of history. Now, let's dive into the gritty details of daily life once the sun is high and the battles are temporarily on pause. It's time to talk about the 3 H's: hunger, hygiene, and hilarity, or what passes for medieval entertainment. First up, let's tackle the gastronomic delights of a crusading night. Spoiler alert, you're not exactly feasting on roast swan every night. Meals are more akin to survival rations than gourmet spreads. Picture this, a steady diet of hardtack and salted meat. Hardtack, the medieval equivalent of a jawbreaker, could double as a weapon in a pinch. And that's salted meat. Let's just say it's a salty surprise if you can identify the animal it came from. Fresh food is a luxury, dependent on foraging or the goodwill of local territories. A knight might dream of feasting on some roast venison, but reality often serves up a thin gruel instead. Water is another story. Finding clean drinking water can be more of a challenge than dodging enemy arrows. Knights often rely on wine or ale, less for the buzz, more for safety, as alcohol kills off those pesky bacteria. But too much of the good stuff, and you'll be in no condition to swing a sword, let alone ride a horse. Hydration on a crusade is about balancing on the fine line between quenching thirst and maintaining your wits. Next, let's delve into the rather unromantic side of knightly life, hygiene, or rather the lack thereof. Bathing is a rare luxury, more myth than reality. When you do find a chance to wash, the experience is less spa day, more dunk in a questionable stream. Forget soap. You're making do with whatever abrasive material is on hand. And while the romantic tales might have you believe knights smelled of roses and valor, the truth is closer to sweat and iron. Living in a camp means sharing space, and inevitably sharing germs. Disease spreads faster than gossip at court, with dysentery and typhoid lurking like unwelcome squires. It's the medieval version of a bad roommate, one you can't evict. Knights are no strangers to the physician's tent, a place where medical science meets medieval guesswork. Bloodletting for a headache, anyone. In between the stomach churns and the hygiene horrors, downtime does exist. Here's a surprise. It's not all sword polishing and gazing wistfully at the horizon. Chess is a popular pastime, a strategic respite from the chaos of battle. Think of it as medieval mindfulness, where you can plot your rook's moves rather than your next military campaign. Religious devotions also play a big role, with knights seeking solace and guidance in prayer. After all, when you're marching into the jaws of death, a little divine intervention sounds pretty appealing. Now, let's talk camaraderie and the occasional clash. Within the ranks, you're part of a brotherhood of steel, bound by shared hardships and the constant threat of death. The camaraderie is real, forged in the heat of battle and the chill of fear. But don't let the romantic notion of brotherhood fool you into thinking it's all handshakes and high-fives. Tensions simmer beneath the surface, often boiling over in the form of grudges or rivalries that can turn campfire chats into heated arguments. The psychological toll is undeniable. Prolonged campaigns far from home, living in constant fear of the next ambush or betrayal, can weigh heavily on even the most stalwart knight. Letters from home become lifelines, cherished scraps of parchment that remind you there's a world beyond the battlefield. But each letter also brings a fresh wave of homesickness, a reminder of the life and loved ones left behind. The Holy Land, for all its promises, is a far cry from the green fields of home. The landscape is harsh, unforgiving, a constant reminder of the distance you've traveled and the challenges yet to face. But within this crucible of conflict and camaraderie, knights find a resilience they never knew they possessed. It's a testament to the human spirit, the ability to endure and adapt even in the most trying of circumstances. As the afternoon sun casts its golden glow, you pause to consider the complex web of existence here, a life of duty, hardship, and fleeting moments of joy. For every legend of gallant knights and noble deeds, there's a reality of grit, grime, and the relentless grind of survival. It's a world where myth and reality intertwine, creating a tapestry as rich and varied as the lands you traverse. So, as the day draws to a close, and you prepare for whatever tomorrow might bring, remember that beneath the shining armor lies the heart of a knight, beating with the rhythm of history, caught in the paradox of legend and life. As the day winds down, the campfire crackles, casting flickering shadows on your comrades' faces. It's a moment of reflection, where the reality of knightly life collides with the romanticized myths that have endured through time. Knights in the Crusades are often depicted as noble paladins, riding forth to battle infidels and reclaim the Holy Land for Christendom. But as we've seen, this image is as polished as their armor, shiny on the surface, but full of dents underneath. The legacy of knights in the Crusades is a complex tapestry woven with threads of ambition, faith, and folly. On one hand, they were the rock stars of their era, immortalized in songs and stories as paragons of chivalry. The chivalric code, with its emphasis on honor, bravery, and courtesy, became the medieval equivalent of a brand. one that knights were eager to embody, at least in theory. Yet this code was less a daily reality and more a lofty ideal. After all, it's hard to be courteous when you're knee-deep in mud, swinging a sword at someone who'd rather see you skewered. Economically, the Crusades were a mixed bag. For some lucky knights, the campaigns opened doors to new lands and wealth. Successful conquests could mean the acquisition of valuable territories, a tempting prospect for any land-hungry noble. But for others, the financial burden was ruinous. Outfitting oneself for a crusade could cost a small fortune, often 4 to 5 times a knight's annual income, not to mention the ongoing expenses of maintaining a retinue and horses. Many knights returned home to find their estates in disarray, their coffers drained, and their dreams of glory turned to dust. Politically, the Crusades had profound consequences on both European and Middle Eastern societies. In Europe, the expeditions helped consolidate the power of the Church, giving the Pope unprecedented influence. The idea of a unified Christian front, however, was more fantasy than fact. The reality was a patchwork of conflicting interests and squabbles over spoils, with alliances as fragile as a medieval truce. The Crusades also accelerated the decline of the Byzantine Empire, as the Fourth Crusade famously ended with the sacking of Constantinople in 1204, a betrayal that left deep scars and a legacy of distrust between Eastern and Western Christianity. In the Middle East, the arrival of the Crusaders was met with a mixture of resistance and bewilderment. The Crusades disrupted established societies, bringing with them not just war, but also cultural exchanges. While some local rulers saw opportunities for trade and alliances, others faced the harsh reality of occupation and conflict. The legacy of the Crusades is still felt today, with some viewing them as emblematic of a long history of Western interference in the region. As you sit by the fire, contemplating these legacies, it's worth pondering how the ideals of knighthood have persisted and evolved. The romantic notion of a knight in shining armor has been immortalized in countless movies, books, and TV shows. From Sir Lancelot to Aragorn, the archetype of the noble warrior endures, a testament to the enduring appeal of chivalric ideals. Yet, these portrayals often gloss over the gritty realities, focusing instead on heroics and honor rather than the harsh truths of medieval life. In the real world, chivalric orders continue to exist, albeit in forms that would be unrecognizable to a medieval knight. The Order of the Garter, established in 1348 by King Edward Roman III of England, remains one of the most prestigious orders of knighthood today. Its members, however, are more likely to be found at state banquets than on battlefields. Modern knighthood is a ceremonial honor, bestowed in recognition of contributions to society rather than martial prowess. It's a nod to tradition, a way of preserving the past while adapting to the present. As you gaze into the flames, it's clear that the legacy of knights in the Crusades is a study in contrasts. They were both conquerors and casualties, heroes and opportunists. Their stories are a reminder of the dual nature of history, where myth and reality coexist, each shaping the other over time. The allure of the knightly ideal endures because it speaks to a deep-seated human desire for heroism and honor, a longing for a world where valor triumphs over villainy. Yet, as we've seen, the path of a knight is anything but straightforward. It's a journey marked by triumphs and trials, a constant balancing act between the noble and the necessary. As the fire's warmth begins to fade and the stars twinkle above, you know that the legacy of the Crusades, like the life of a knight, is a complex tapestry, one where every thread tells a story and every story holds a lesson. So, as you prepare to rest, consider the weight of this legacy. It's a reminder that history is not just a series of events, but a living narrative that continues to shape our world. The stories of knights in the Crusades are not just tales of battles and sieges. They are reflections of human ambition and frailty, of the eternal quest for meaning and glory in a world as complex and challenging as the one they left behind. As the night envelops you, let the lessons of the past guide you into the future, where new adventures await and new stories are yet to be told. In the dusty cradle of early 19th century southern Africa, where the sun baked everything with the enthusiasm of a bad day at the beach, a kid named Shaka was about to rewrite the script of his destiny. Born in 1787 to Senzangekona Karjama, a minor chief of the Zulu clan, and Nandi, a woman from the Langeni clan, Shaka's start was less than auspicious. If there was a social ladder, Shaka's family was somewhere between the first rung and the ground, making his rise all the more remarkable. You see, Shaka wasn't just another kid with a funny name in a small-time clan. He had the kind of ambition that could make Rome look like a weekend project. Now, let's set the scene. Southern Africa, a region simmering with cultural vibrancy and simmering socio-political dynamics. This was an age when power wasn't measured by how many Instagram followers you had, but by how many spears you could muster. The political landscape was a patchwork of small chiefdoms, each vying for control, like a high-stakes game of Risk, but with real lives on the line. And into this complicated socio-political jigsaw fell young Shaka, born out of wedlock, a fact that did not win him any favors. The young Shaka, whose name literally means intestinal beetle, had a childhood that was about as stable as a three-legged table. Due to the scandalous nature of his parents' union, he and his mother were often the subjects of ridicule, which probably didn't do wonders for his self-esteem. But if misery loves company, Shaka had plenty of it growing up. Nandi and Shaka were shunned, and they spent much of his early life moving between clans, a bit like a traveling show that nobody wanted to see. Despite these less-than-ideal beginnings, Shaka had a knack for turning adversity into opportunity. His early years were a crash course in survival, resilience, and quite possibly holding a grudge. By the time he was in his teens, Shaka was sent to live with his father, which was less a family reunion and more like being handed a live grenade. But under the watchful, albeit indifferent, eye of his father, Shaka began to hone his warrior skills. Shaka's journey from disgraced son to military maestro took a decisive turn when he joined the Mthethwa clan, led by Chief Dingiswayo. Now, Dingiswayo wasn't your average leader. He had a vision that involved more than just hoarding cattle and collecting wives. He saw potential in Shaka, that rare blend of charisma and cunning. Under Dingiswayo's mentorship, Shaka's military acumen started to shine brighter than a gold-plated spear. By the numbers, Shaka's ascent was nothing short of meteoric. Through a series of strategic alliances and sheer determination, he began to reshape the socio-political landscape. At the height of his power, Shaka commanded an army of around 40,000 men, a staggering force in the context of the time. His innovations, like the short-stabbing spear known as the Iklor and the deadly buffalo horns military formation, were game-changers. These weren't just tweaks in warfare. They were seismic shifts that left his enemies scrambling like ants at a picnic. But let's not romanticize Shaka's rise too much. Sure, he was a brilliant strategist, but he also ruled with a fist of iron, and possibly some steel and bone for good measure. His consolidation of power was ruthless and often brutal. The expansion of the Zulu kingdom under his leadership left a trail of destruction in its wake, with estimates suggesting that as many as 1 million people perished during the Mfecane, the period of upheaval his campaigns triggered. While Shaka's life is often cloaked in the gauzy mist of legend, it was also marked by very real, very human tragedies. The death of his mother, Nandi, in 1827 hit him like a ton of bricks. Overcome with grief, Shaka ordered a mourning period that banned the planting of crops and the consumption of milk, essentially hitting pause on the economy of his kingdom. It was a move that would have baffled economists and left his people teetering on the brink of starvation. Shaka's story is a testament to the potency of vision and ruthlessness when mixed in equal parts. He transformed the Zulu from a minor clan into a juggernaut, a feat as improbable as it was impressive. Yet, in a world defined by shifting alliances and ruthless power struggles, Shaka's ascent was as much a product of his time as it was of his ambition and military genius. So, as you drift off to sleep, remember that Shaka's story isn't just about rise and conquest. It's about a man who took the hand he was dealt and played it with a cunning that would make Machiavelli nod in approval. As the narrative unfolds, keep an eye out for how this one-time underdog leveraged his hardships to forge an empire, and how, in doing so, he left an indelible mark on the annals of history. Now, if Shaka's life was a series of cliffhangers, his rise to power was the ultimate plot twist. Picture a young man, fueled by a cocktail of ambition, intelligence, and a touch of the vendetta, stepping into the chaotic world of African politics and turning it on its head. His genius lay in his ability to see the battlefield as a chessboard, while everyone else was still playing checkers. First up, let's talk about the Iklwa spear. Named for the sound it made when pulled from a body. Yes, it's as gruesome as it sounds. This short stabbing spear was Shaka's brainchild. Before Shaka, warriors threw long spears from afar, a tactic that was about as effective as using a slingshot to fell a giant. The Iklwa, however, was like the Swiss army knife of its time, compact, efficient, and deadly in close combat. This spear wasn't just a tool, it was a symbol of a new, aggressive Zulu warfare that favored face-to-face confrontation over distant skirmishes. Shaka's military reforms didn't stop at weaponry. He introduced regimented training that would make a modern drill sergeant proud. The Zulu warriors were trained to march over 50 miles a day, barefoot, on thorny savannas, carrying their weapons and supplies. Talk about a workout plan that would put today's fitness gurus to shame. And as if that weren't enough, he implemented the buffalo horns formation. Picture a tactical embrace that enveloped the enemy like a giant hug of doom. The chest engaged the opponent head-on, while the horns flanked and encircled, and the loins provided reserves to reinforce or pursue. This wasn't just a strategy. It was the military version of a chessboard checkmate, designed to confuse and crush opponents simultaneously. Shaka also transformed the social fabric of the Zulu kingdom. He consolidated smaller clans under his leadership, using a mix of diplomacy and, let's be honest, brute force. It was a classic carrot-and-stick approach, where the carrot was security and prosperity under his rule, and the stick was annihilation if you dared defy him. This kind of leadership was like playing Monopoly, but instead of buying properties, you were annexing entire clans. By 1825, Shaka's direct control spanned an impressive 30,000 square miles, roughly the size of Ireland. He wasn't just a military ruler, he was an empire builder. But let's not sugarcoat this with sepia-toned nostalgia. Shaka's rise was paved with the rubble of conquered chiefdoms and the bones of fallen foes. His regime was as brutal as it was brilliant. He enforced strict discipline and demanded absolute loyalty, punishing even the slightest hint of dissent with death. It was a zero-tolerance policy that would make even the most draconian HR department blush. Economically, Shaka was no slouch either. He understood that an army didn't just march on its stomach, it thrived on a well-oiled supply chain. Cattle, the lifeblood of the Zulu economy, were amassed in vast numbers, ensuring his forces were always well-fed and ready for battle. He turned the Zulu kingdom into a powerhouse of agricultural productivity, a necessary backbone for his military ambitions. This wasn't just about warfare. It was about creating a sustainable empire that could withstand the test of time, or at least the next ambitious upstart. Now, if Hollywood was scripting this, they'd probably gloss over the more ruthless elements of Shaka's rule. But the truth is, Shaka's kingdom was as much about fear as it was about respect. He was a ruler who understood the power of psychological warfare, using terror as a tool to maintain control and deter rebellion. His legacy, while tinged with the blood of his enemies and the tears of his subjects, was undeniably transformative. But let's not get too carried away. For every story of Shaka's brilliance, there's a cautionary tale about the cost of ambition. His reforms, while revolutionary, came at a price. The Mfecane, literally, the crushing, was the devastating period of upheaval and migration triggered by his conquests, displacing and destroying numerous communities. Some estimates suggest that the chaos left around 2 million people dead or displaced. It's a stark reminder that every historical figure, no matter how accomplished, leaves a complex and often troubling legacy. As we wrap up this chapter of Shaka's saga, it's clear that his life was a study in contrast. He was both a visionary leader and a ruthless tyrant, a military genius and a man driven by personal vendettas. His story is a tapestry of triumph and tragedy, woven with the threads of human ambition and the harsh realities of power. As we peel back the layers of his legacy, we find a man who reshaped the Zulu kingdom and southern Africa forever. But remember, we're only halfway through this epic tale, and there's plenty more drama to come. Stay tuned as we dive deeper into the rise of the Zulu kingdom and the indelible mark Shaka left on history. With Shaka's legacy being a tapestry of triumphs and tragedies, his story is far from over. The next chapter in the rise of the Zulu kingdom is a roller coaster of alliances, marriages, and campaigns that would make even the most ambitious chess grandmaster break a sweat. If you thought his earlier exploits were impressive, just wait. Shaka's expansion was about to hit the afterburners. First, let's dive into the art of the deal, Zulu style. Shaka wasn't just a warrior, he was a diplomat with a sword. Political alliances were the currency of power, and Shaka was a master of the exchange. While it's tempting to think of him as a lone wolf, the reality was more complicated. Shaka knew that building a kingdom wasn't a solo project. It required a network of allies and vassals who were, ideally, more friends than frenemies. And in a landscape where trust was as rare as a peaceful weekend, that was no small feat. Strategic marriages were one of his favorite tools. Picture this: Shaka, the ultimate matchmaker, using marriages as a way to cement alliances and secure loyalty. It was like royal Tinder, but with a lot more at stake than just a second date. These unions were less about love and more about power dynamics. Marrying off relatives to influential clans wasn't just a family affair. It was a geopolitical maneuver. By creating interconnections between the Zulu and other clans, Shaka was weaving a web of alliances that made it harder for anyone to rise against him without also endangering their kin. But let's not romanticize this too much. These were not fairy tale weddings with happily ever afters. The stakes were high, and the cost of betrayal was often death. These alliances were bound by blood and sealed with the threat of violence. It was a precarious balance, like juggling knives while riding a unicycle. On the battlefield, Shaka's campaigns continued to reshape the map of southern Africa with the precision of a surgeon and the brutality of a storm. His military tactics were as relentless as a caffeine-fueled all-nighter. He expanded the Zulu territory through a series of ruthless campaigns, each one more audacious than the last. The Zulu kingdom grew like an ink stain on parchment, absorbing smaller chiefdoms and leaving a swath of destruction in its wake. One of his notable campaigns was against the Ndwandwe, a rival group that posed a significant threat to Shaka's burgeoning empire. The Ndwandwe, under their leader Zwide, were no pushovers. They were a formidable force, and their clashes with the Zulu were like the heavyweight bouts of the 19th century. But Shaka's tactical genius, combined with his relentless drive, eventually wore them down. After a series of battles that would have made a Game of Thrones episode look like a friendly skirmish, Shaka emerged victorious. The Ndwandwe were either absorbed into the Zulu ranks or scattered, their power broken. This wasn't just about territorial gain. Shaka's conquests were also about resources, particularly cattle. Cattle were the economic backbone of the Zulu kingdom, serving as currency, food, and social status. Shaka understood that to sustain his empire, he needed to ensure a steady supply of these four-legged assets. The more cattle he controlled, the more power he wielded. It was a simple equation, but one that required constant vigilance and a willingness to use force when necessary. But all this expansion came at a cost, both human and material. The rapid growth of the Zulu kingdom unleashed a wave of displacement and chaos known as the Mfeke, a Zulu word that translates to the crushing or scattering. As Shaka's armies advanced, communities were uprooted and populations were driven from their homelands. Some estimates suggest that as many as 2 million people were affected, either killed or displaced in the upheaval. It was a period of turmoil that left a deep scar on the region's history. The human cost was staggering, but the material demands were also immense. Maintaining an army of Shaka's size required a logistical operation worthy of a modern military. Supplies had to be secured, troops fed, and weapons maintained. The Zulu economy had to be robust enough to support these needs, which meant that agriculture and trade had to flourish even as the kingdom expanded. It was a delicate balance, like trying to keep a house of cards standing in a hurricane. Let's not forget the psychological toll of such rapid expansion. Shaka's reign was marked by a culture of fear and loyalty, where dissent was met with swift and often brutal retribution. His rule was as much about psychological dominance as it was about military might. He used fear as a tool to maintain control and ensure compliance, a tactic that worked well in the short term but left long-lasting scars on his people. Despite the bloodshed and brutality, there's no denying Shaka's impact on southern Africa. His ability to forge a powerful kingdom from a minor clan is a testament to his strategic brilliance and relentless ambition. But as with any empire built on conquest, the seeds of its own destruction were planted alongside its triumphs. The Zulu kingdom, under Shaka's leadership, became a force to be reckoned with, but the costs of such rapid expansion were high, and the consequences would be felt for generations. As we pause to catch our breath in this whirlwind saga, it's clear that Shaka's story is far from over. His legacy is a complex tapestry, woven with threads of ambition, innovation, and ruthless pragmatism. The Zulu kingdom's explosive expansion under his leadership was both a triumph of vision and a tragedy of human cost. But remember, we're not at the end yet. There's more to explore, more myths to debunk, and more history to uncover. Stay tuned as we continue to unravel the extraordinary tale of Shaka and the Zulu kingdom. As Shaka's Zulu kingdom thundered towards its climax, the stage was set for a dramatic showdown, not just with external foes, but from within his own backyard. You know that classic saying, "What goes up must come down." Well, Shaka's empire was no exception, and as it reached its zenith, the cracks were starting to show. Internally, the once bright-eyed enthusiasm for Shaka's rule was beginning to dim like a candle in a drafty room. His reign had been as brilliant as it was brutal, but the relentless expansion came with a hefty price tag. Many of Shaka's subjects, who had once been swept up in the fervor of his military exploits, were now feeling the pinch. The constant state of warfare had drained resources, not to mention morale. The Zulu people were weary, their daily lives increasingly dominated by the demands of an unending military machine. Remember, this was a society where cattle were king, the economic backbone, if you will. And while Shaka had amassed impressive herds through conquest, the agricultural output needed to support such a large empire was under strain. Fields lay fallow during extended military campaigns, causing food shortages, and more importantly, a squeeze on social stability. Shaka's once loyal generals began whispering discontent, their loyalty eroded by the hardships faced by their kin and clans. Now, let's talk about Shaka's leadership style, which was as subtle as a bull in a china shop. While his iron-fisted approach ensured compliance, it also sowed seeds of rebellion. His penchant for harsh discipline left no room for dissent, creating a pressure cooker of resentment. The fear that kept his warriors in line also bred plots in the shadows, as some began to wonder if the price of loyalty was too high. Externally, the Zulu kingdom was starting to attract attention like a neon sign in a dark alley. The European colonial powers, with their insatiable appetites for land and resources, were casting their greedy eyes on southern Africa. These weren't just any Europeans, mind you. We're talking about the British, who were busy painting the world map with Union Jacks, and the Dutch-descended Boers, who were equally keen on carving out their own slice of paradise. The British, with their ever-expanding empire, were particularly interested in the region's potential. The discovery of diamonds and gold later in the century would only heighten this interest. But even in Shaka's time, the Europeans were sniffing around like bloodhounds. The Cape Colony was already under British control, and as they moved inland, the Zulu kingdom stood as both a barrier and a tantalizing prize. Shaka, ever the strategist, was not oblivious to these looming threats. He had already demonstrated an understanding of the power dynamics at play, having sent emissaries to the British in an attempt to gauge their intentions. Diplomatic ties were a double-edged sword, offering both protection and risk. Shaka's goal was to keep the British at bay, leveraging his kingdom's might to negotiate from a position of strength. Yet the Europeans weren't the only external pressure. The Boers, descendants of Dutch settlers, were also on the move, trekking inland in search of new lands. Their great trek, beginning in the 1830, would bring them into direct conflict with the Zulu. These were hardy folks, used to roughing it on the frontier and not inclined to back down easily. The stage was set for a collision course, a clash of worlds that would ripple through the annals of history. But the real kicker in this saga is how Shaka's internal challenges intersected with these external pressures. It was a perfect storm, with Shaka caught in the eye. The discontent simmering within his kingdom was like kindling, waiting for the spark of external threats to ignite a wildfire. As the Zulu kingdom stretched to its limits, the question wasn't if it would face a reckoning, but when. Let's not forget the role of Shaka's own personal demons in this unfolding drama. The death of his mother, Nandi, in 1827 had been a turning point. His grief-driven decrees, like banning the planting of crops, had left his people reeling, both emotionally and economically. It was a decision that would have had modern economists scratching their heads and shaking their fists. This period of mourning, while deeply personal, was a stark reminder of how intertwined Shaka's personal life was with the fate of his kingdom. In the corridors of power, family dynamics were about as stable as a house of cards in a windstorm. Shaka's half-brothers, Dingain and Emojis, were eyeing the throne with barely concealed ambition. Shaka's autocratic style had left little room for trust, and in a world where power was a zero-sum game, every ally was a potential rival. It's a tale as old as time. Blood is thicker than water, but ambition is thicker than both. So here we are, with Shaka's empire at a crossroads. The internal dissatisfaction, coupled with the looming threat of European encroachment, was setting the stage for a dramatic shift. The Zulu kingdom, once an unstoppable force, was now facing challenges that even Shaka's military genius might struggle to overcome. It's a story that reminds us of the fragile nature of power, how quickly the winds of fortune can change, turning kings into pawns and empires into relics. Shaka's legacy is a testament to the heights of human ambition and the depths of its consequences. As we look ahead, the question isn't just about what Shaka built, but what he left behind. Stay tuned, because the next chapter in this saga promises more twists and turns as the Zulu kingdom faces the ultimate test of endurance and resilience against both internal and external forces. The story of Shaka and his legacy is far from over, and there's plenty more history to unravel. As the stage was set for the final act of Shaka's tumultuous reign, the air was thick with tension, like a gathering storm on the horizon. It's a classic tale of power, where the forces of ambition and betrayal collide in a dramatic crescendo. You know, the kind of plot twist that would make even Shakespeare's eyebrows raise. The year was 1828, and while the world was busy spinning, the Zulu kingdom was teetering on the brink of transformation, or perhaps disintegration. Shaka, the once unstoppable juggernaut, found himself ensnared by the very web of power he had so masterfully woven. His half-brothers, Dingain and Emojis, had been waiting in the wings, sharpening their ambitions with the precision of a fine Zulu blade. Tired of living in the shadow of Shaka's iron-fisted rule, they saw an opportunity to seize power. It was a classic coup d'etat in the making, with all the intrigue and betrayal you'd expect from a royal drama. And in September of that fateful year, they made their move. The assassination of Shaka is shrouded in as much intrigue and myth as his rise to power. Accounts vary, but the consensus is clear. It was a swift and brutal end. Armed with a concoction of grievances and perhaps some whispered promises of a better future, Dingain and Emojis struck. Shaka, the once mighty king of the Zulus, met his untimely end at the hands of his own blood. It's a chilling reminder that in the Game of Thrones, family ties are as fragile as a spider's web in a hurricane. But let's take a step back from the soap opera of royal intrigue and examine the man behind the myth. Shaka's legacy is a complex tapestry, woven with threads of military genius, ruthless ambition, and the relentless pursuit of power. His innovations in warfare transformed the Zulu kingdom from a collection of small clans into a formidable empire. Yet, his story is also a cautionary tale about the perils of unchecked ambition. His drive for expansion left a trail of destruction and set the stage for future conflicts, both within the Zulu kingdom and with external forces. Shaka's military reforms, like the introduction of the short stabbing spear and the infamous buffalo horns formation, were revolutionary. These tactics didn't just change the way wars were fought, they altered the very fabric of southern African society. Under Shaka's rule, Zulu kingdom expanded to cover an area roughly the size of modern-day Switzerland, an impressive feat by any measure. Yet this rapid expansion came at a staggering human cost, with the Mfecane leaving millions dead or displaced. It's the kind of trade-off that makes you question the price of progress. Economically, Shaka understood the importance of a well-oiled supply chain. His focus on cattle accumulation ensured that his armies were well-fed and ready for battle. However, this emphasis on military might often came at the expense of social stability. The constant demand for resources to fuel his campaigns strained the kingdom's agricultural output, leading to food shortages and discontent among the populace. It's a bit like trying to build a skyscraper on a foundation of sand, a marvel of engineering that could collapse at any moment. The myths surrounding Shaka's reign have only grown with time, often romanticizing his rule as a golden age of Zulu power. Yet the reality was far more nuanced. Shaka was both a visionary leader and a ruthless tyrant, a man whose ambitions reshaped the course of history, but left a legacy marred by violence and upheaval. His story is a testament to the dual nature of power, the ability to create and destroy, to inspire and to terrify. In the aftermath of Shaka's assassination, the Zulu kingdom faced an uncertain future. Dingaan ascended to the throne, but his rule was fraught with challenges. The external threats from European colonial powers and the internal divisions within the kingdom left him with a precarious grip on power. The British and the Boers were increasingly encroaching on Zulu territory, their eyes set on the region's resources. The discovery of diamonds and gold in the latter part of the century would only intensify these tensions, setting the stage for future conflicts. Shaka's legacy, while undeniably significant, is often romanticized in popular culture. The image of Shaka as a warrior king, leading his indomitable armies across the African plains, has taken on a life of its own. Yet, it's important to remember that history is written by the victors, and sometimes the embellishers. The true story of Shaka is one of complexity and contradiction, a narrative that defies easy categorization. So, what can we learn from Shaka's life and legacy? Perhaps it's a reminder that power, like a double-edged sword, can cut both ways. The same drive that propelled Shaka to greatness also sowed the seeds of his downfall. His story is a poignant illustration of the human condition, the relentless pursuit of glory, the allure of ambition, and the inevitable reckoning that follows. As we wrap up our journey through the rise of the Zulu kingdom, it's clear that Shaka was a man who left an indelible mark on history. His legacy is a mosaic of triumphs and tragedies, victories and defeats. And while the myths surrounding his life may captivate our imaginations, it's the harsh realities that offer the most profound lessons. Shaka's tale is a testament to the complexities of power, a narrative woven with threads of ambition, innovation, and the timeless struggle for dominance. In closing, let us remember Shaka not just as a symbol of Zulu pride, but as a figure whose story echoes through the corridors of history, a reminder of the power of human ambition and the profound impact it can have on the world. Shaka's legacy is a rich tapestry, one that continues to inspire and challenge us to this day. As we lay down our proverbial spears and shields, let's take a moment to reflect on the lessons of the past and the enduring legacy of a man who dared to dream big and paid the ultimate price. Before Genghis, Khan was the fearsome leader who could make seasoned warriors think twice about their life choices. He was just a kid named Temujin, roaming the harsh Mongolian steppes like a scrappy underdog in a medieval rags-to-riches story. But calling his early life challenging is like saying the Mongol cavalry was pretty quick. Born around 1162, which gives him a birth year as fuzzy as a yak's underbelly, Temujin's childhood was a masterclass in adversity. His father, Yesuje, was a local chieftain, which sounds impressive until you realize it was like being the CEO of a lemonade stand in a desert of cutthroat competitors. The Mongolian steppes, a place where the weather is mostly frozen tundra or scorching wasteland, with a few good grazing spots in between. It was here that Temujin learned the hard way about betrayal and resilience. When he was about 9, his dad was poisoned by the Tartars, a neighboring tribe with a penchant for murder over tea. Talk about a rough start. Orphaned in a hostile environment, Temujin's family was unceremoniously kicked out of their tribe, left to fend for themselves like contestants on the world's most brutal survival show. Now, being a teenager anywhere is tough. But try being Temujin, with no tribe, no support, and no Netflix to distract you. His mother, Holan, was the real MVP here, holding the family together with grit and a few wild onions. Temujin's motivation, a burning desire to unite the fractious Mongol tribes and make everyone else regret crossing him. And boy, did he have a list. But first, let's talk about the sibling rivalry that could make Cain and Abel look like the Brady Bunch. Temujin's half-brother, Begta, became a thorn in his side, presumably over issues like food rationing and, well, being a teenage boy in 12th century Mongolia. The tension climaxed in a confrontation that ended with Temujin killing Begta. This was less a family bonding moment and more a survival of the fittest in a world where mercy was a luxury. Fast forward to Temujin's teenage years, and you find a young man with the drive of a Silicon Valley startup founder, but with a lot more horses. Around 1177, fate dealt him another tough hand. After a failed alliance with the Teocheid clan, he was captured and enslaved. They slapped a wooden collar on him, which might have been the medieval equivalent of a fashion don't, but more importantly, it was a security device. Temujin was now a prisoner, and you can bet he wasn't thrilled about his new accessory. Here's where Temujin's story takes a turn worthy of a Hollywood blockbuster. With the resourcefulness of a Mongolian Mac jiver, he managed to escape by waiting for his captors to get sloppy, which, let's face it, was a matter of when, not if. He fled under the cover of darkness, ditching the collar in a daring escape that echoes both Shawshank Redemption and Home Alone. No wet bandits here, just a determined exile using the night sky as his guide. Once free, Temujin didn't just run and hide. He regrouped. He began to form alliances, starting with a blood brother pact called Anda with Jamaka, a powerful ally who would later flip the script and become a rival. But that's a tale for another time. Through cunning diplomacy and a knack for survival, Temujin started gathering a following. He wasn't just building a coalition. He was laying the groundwork for something unprecedented, uniting the Mongol tribes under a single banner. To put this into perspective, imagine trying to organize a massive family reunion where everyone hates each other and has a history of blood feuds. Temujin's early life was a series of hard knocks, but each misfortune lit a fire in him that would eventually burn across continents. His transformation from outcast to the legendary Genghis Khan was as much about personal vendetta as it was about vision. By turning his setbacks into stepping stones, he didn't just survive, he thrived in a way that would reshape the world. And thus, Temujin's journey to becoming Genghis Khan, the unifier of the Mongols, was set in motion. In a world where the line between life and death was as thin as a horsehair, he proved that sometimes the best way to ensure your survival is to make sure you're the one riding the rules. As Temujin evolved into the formidable Genghis Khan, he didn't just gather tribes. He crafted a Mongol war machine that would make even the most seasoned military historian swoon. Forget the idea of a disorganized mob of horsemen galloping aimlessly across Eurasia. Genghis Khan was orchestrating a symphony of military precision that blended the brutality of a Viking raid with the logistics of a modern military campaign. First up, let's chat about his army. By the time Genghis was at the helm, he commanded forces numbering around 100, 000, give or take a warrior or two. These weren't just any soldiers. They were cavalry experts who could fire arrows accurately while riding at full speed. Think horseback archery meets fast and furious, ruthless efficiency and high-octane maneuvers. Each soldier had at least 5 horses, allowing them to switch mounts and maintain their relentless pace, all without needing pit stops like a NASCAR team. Genghis also had a knack for psychological warfare that would give Machiavelli a run for his money. He understood that the biggest battles are often won in the mind. His favorite trick, the good old fake retreat. Picture this. The Mongols feign a hasty retreat, luring their enemies out of fortified positions. Just when their foes thought they had the upper hand, the Mongols would turn on a dime and attack with ferocious speed. It was like giving false hope a medieval makeover. And let's talk about the Mongol postal system, which was less about delivering love letters and more about maintaining the empire's iron grip. Known as the Yam, it was like the Pony Express but on steroids and with a few more arrows. This network of relay stations spanned thousands of miles, allowing Genghis to communicate across his sprawling domain faster than you can say instant messaging. Riders could cover up to 200 miles a day, swapping horses at each station, ensuring that orders and intelligence flowed as smoothly as a Mongol arrow through the air. But Genghis wasn't just about brute force and swift communication. He was an organizational genius who could teach a thing or two about management. He divided his army into units of 10, known as Arban, which scaled up to larger formations of 1,000, or Mingan. This wasn't just military math. It was a structure that provided flexibility and control, ensuring that his forces could adapt to any battlefield chaos thrown their way. Let's debunk the myth of the barbarian horde while we're at it. Yes, the Mongols were fearsome, and yes, they left a trail of destruction that could make a tornado look like a gentle breeze. But calling them a mindless horde ignores the cold, hard logistics and strategy they employed. Genghis valued merit over birthright, promoting soldiers based on skill and loyalty rather than noble lineage, a revolutionary concept in a world where nepotism was practically a sport. Then there's the small matter of his campaign's efficiency. When the Mongol war machine rolled into town, it wasn't just about conquest, it was about integration. Genghis brought skilled artisans, engineers, and administrators into his fold, enriching his empire with the talents of conquered peoples rather than just pillaging and moving on. His empire became a melting pot where knowledge traveled alongside the spoils of war, creating a trade network that stretched from China to Europe. Genghis's campaign against the Khwarezmian Empire, for instance, is a testament to his relentless efficiency. In 1219, he sent a caravan to trade with the Khwarezm Shah, only to have his envoys executed, a diplomatic faux pas of epic proportions. Genghis responded with a force that razed cities and dismantled an empire. His troops covered vast distances at breakneck speeds, often using the element of surprise to devastating effect. And here's a juicy tidbit. When the Mongols besieged a city, they often used captured locals as human shields, or sent them in first to absorb the arrows, an early form of psychological warfare that demonstrated both cunning and cruelty. It was a brutal reminder that in Genghis's world, strategic advantage often trumped humanitarian concerns. As we peel back the layers of the Mongol conquests, one truth becomes clear. Genghis Khan was as much an administrator as he was a conqueror. His empire wasn't built on chaos, but on a foundation of order and efficiency that allowed his rule to extend across vast territories. Sure, the romantic vision of the Mongol horde sweeping across the plains has its appeal, but the real story is one of meticulous planning, innovative tactics, and an empire that functioned with the precision of a Swiss watch, albeit one that occasionally flattened entire cities. Genghis Khan's legacy is a complex tapestry of innovation, ruthlessness, and vision that reshaped the medieval world. As the dust settled on his conquests, he proved that a disciplined force with a clear strategy could achieve what seemed impossible. The Mongol Empire wasn't just a flash in the pan. It was a testament to the power of leadership that embraced both tradition and innovation. But don't get too comfortable. Genghis's story is far from over. In the coming chapters, we'll delve into the cultural and economic impacts of his empire, exploring how a nomadic warrior reshaped the course of history. As we dive into the next chapter of Genghis Khan's empire-building saga, it's time to switch gears from the destructive symphony of war to the melodic hum of commerce. Picture this: Genghis Khan, the fearsome warlord, also moonlighting as a medieval Jeff Bezos. You see, Genghis wasn't just about conquering land. He was about building a legacy, and that involved turning the vast Mongol Empire into the Silk Road's expressway. We're talking a trade network so efficient, it would make a modern logistics manager weep tears of joy. Let's set the scene. By the time Genghis was done with his initial conquests, he had a sprawling empire stretching from the Pacific Ocean to the Caspian Sea. That's about 5 million square kilometers of real estate, give or take a mountain range. But what do you do when you've got more land than you can shake a stick at? You get to work on the economic front. Enter the Pax Mongolica, a period of relative peace and stability across Eurasia that allowed trade to flourish like never before. It was the closest thing the medieval world had to a global economy, and Genghis was the unlikely architect of this commercial renaissance. First off, Genghis understood that trade was the lifeblood of any empire. He introduced a universal law code known as the Yasa, which, among other things, protected merchants and traders. This wasn't just a moral decision, it was a strategic one. After all, why burn down a city when you can tax it? The Yasa ensured that merchants could travel across the empire with a degree of safety previously unheard of in a world where bandits and corrupt officials were a dime a dozen. With this legal framework, Genghis was effectively saying, come for the conquests, stay for the commerce. But here's the kicker. Genghis didn't just stop at legal protections. He actively encouraged trade by abolishing trade tariffs within the empire. Imagine the shock of medieval merchants who were suddenly able to move goods from China to Europe without losing half their profits to customs duties. It's like Genghis invented the medieval version of free shipping, and everyone was a prime member. The Mongolian postal system, or YAM, played a crucial role in this economic expansion. It was less about delivering postcards from picturesque battlefields and more about ensuring that trade orders zipped across the empire at lightning speed. With a network of relay stations and fresh horses, dispatches could travel from one end of the empire to the other in record time. Think of it as the FedEx of the 13th century, but with the occasional arrow sticking out of the parcel. Now, let's talk numbers because, frankly, the Mongols knew how to count their chickens and their profits. Under Genghis and his successors, the empire's trade routes became a conduit for goods like silk, spices, and precious metals. The Silk Road, previously a patchwork of dangerous paths, was transformed into a bustling artery of commerce. The Mongols even minted their own currency to facilitate trade, which was a big deal in a world where barter was still the norm. We're talking about an empire that, at its height, generated an annual revenue that would rival the GDP of a small country today. But it wasn't all sunshine and silk. The costs of empire building were as steep as the Mongolian steppes. Maintaining such a vast empire required an army of administrators, and not all of them were as loyal or efficient as Genghis might have hoped. Corruption was an ever-present threat, with local officials occasionally skimming off the top, a medieval version of creative accounting that would have made Iran proud. And here's where the gallows humor comes in. Imagine trying to balance the books of an empire where the currency included livestock, silver ingots, and the odd prisoner of war. It's no wonder medieval accountants might have felt like they were herding cats, on horseback, no less. Yet, despite these challenges, Genghis's economic policies laid the groundwork for a thriving empire that connected east and west in ways that would have been unimaginable just decades earlier. However, every rose has its thorn, and the Mongol Empire's economic bloom was no exception. The very trade routes that enriched the empire also became the superhighways for something far less welcome, the Black Death. The bubonic plague hitched a ride along these bustling trade routes, spreading across continents with devastating speed. It's a grim reminder that progress often comes with unintended consequences, and history has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect it. In the grand tapestry of history, Genghis Khan's legacy is a fascinating blend of ruthless conquest and economic ingenuity. While the image of the Mongol horde riding roughshod over the known world is undeniably dramatic, the reality is that Genghis was as much a builder as he was a destroyer. He understood that to sustain an empire, you needed more than just military might. You needed the wheels of commerce turning smoothly, greased by the oil of efficient governance and strategic foresight. As we peel back the layers of Genghis's economic empire, it's clear that his vision extended far beyond the battlefield. He didn't just conquer territories, he connected them, creating a medieval marketplace that set the stage for future global interactions. In this game of empire building, Genghis Khan was playing chess while everyone else was still figuring out checkers. And while his methods were often as harsh as a Mongolian winter, the impact of his rule was as transformative as it was enduring. Stay tuned as we continue to unravel the complex legacy of Genghis Khan, delving into the cultural and social impacts of his empire. There's still much to explore in the story of a man whose influence echoes through history like the sound of hooves across the steppes. But Genghis Khan wasn't all about swords and saddles. Behind the battlefield bravado, there was a man whose personal life reads like a medieval telenovela, complete with family drama, unexpected alliances, and of course, an impressive collection of progeny that would make even the most prolific TV family tree look barren. First, let's tackle the legendary family tree. Think Game of Thrones, but with more horses and fewer dragons. Genghis had a brood that stretched across the steppes, and the numbers are staggering. We're talking about 500 wives and concubines producing so many offspring that geneticists today estimate around 16 million men in Central Asia carry his Y chromosome. That's about 0.5% of the world's male population, a legacy that's less about family planning and more about world domination. But it wasn't just about quantity. Quality mattered too. Genghis was strategic in his matrimonial alliances, marrying daughters to powerful allies to secure loyalty and strengthen his empire. Talk about using family ties as political glue. His daughters were not damsels in distress, but formidable figures in their own right. They governed territories and commanded respect, showing that the apple didn't fall far from the tree, or the horse, as it were. Let's not forget the drama, because what family saga would be complete without it? Genghis's eldest son, Jarchai, was the subject of a paternity dispute that would make a Maury Povich episode look tame. Rumor had it that Jarchai might have been the son of a rival merchant chief, not Genghis himself. This cloud of suspicion hung over Jarchai's head like a medieval soap opera twist, fueling tensions with his brothers and complicating succession plans. The succession issue was no small matter. With an empire sprawling across continents, choosing an heir was like picking a favorite child when all of them had ambitions sharper than their swords. Genghis eventually settled on his third son, Urgide, bypassing the eldest in a move that echoed through Mongol politics like a thunderclap. Urgide, known for his diplomatic finesse, was seen as the best fit to continue his father's legacy of empire building. But this decision sowed seeds of rivalry that would later challenge the empire's unity. Beyond his family life, Genghis Khan had a surprisingly cultured side, one that might not be evident when you picture him as the quintessential warlord. But here's the twist. Genghis was an unexpected patron of the arts and sciences. While his armies were busy reshaping borders, he was busy reshaping minds. Under his rule, the Mongol Empire became a crucible for cultural exchange, where scholars, artisans, and scientists from across the known world mingled and shared knowledge. It's easy to imagine Genghis as the ultimate destroyer, but he was also a builder in unexpected ways, brought scribes from China to work with Persian poets, creating a unique blend of cultural cross-pollination. The Mongol Empire became a silk road for ideas, not just goods. And while his methods could be as brutal as a Mongolian winter, the end result was a flourishing of intellectual exchange that paved the way for advancements in astronomy, medicine, and technology. Take, for instance, the Mongol interest in astronomy. They were keen observers of the stars, not just for navigation, but for understanding the universe. Under Genghis and his successors, observatories were built, and scholars were encouraged to study celestial phenomena. This was no small feat in a world where scientific inquiry often took a backseat to superstition. Genghis's openness to new ideas made the Mongol court a hub of intellectual curiosity. Meanwhile, the exchange of medical knowledge flourished under the Mongols. Physicians from different parts of the empire shared their expertise, leading to advancements in medical practices that would influence regions far beyond the Mongolian steppes. It was a time when the healing arts were as valuable as military prowess, and Genghis's encouragement of this exchange laid a foundation for future medical breakthroughs. But let's not romanticize too much. The Mongol approach to cultural promotion often came with a side of coercion. Conquered artisans and scholars were sometimes invited to contribute to the empire's intellectual wealth, a process that could be as gentle as a Mongol siege. Yet, despite the rough edges, this patronage of the arts and sciences illustrates Genghis's understanding that knowledge was power, a resource as vital as any battlefield victory. In essence, Genghis Khan's legacy extends far beyond the clang of swords and the thundering hooves of his cavalry. He was a complex figure who wielded both the pen and the sword with equal dexterity. His empire, though born in blood and fire, became a beacon of cultural and scientific exchange that influenced countless generations. The Mongol footprint on history is as much about the flow of ideas as it is about the flow of armies. So, as we delve deeper into Genghis's empire, remember that his story is not just one of conquest, but of unexpected collaboration and cultural fusion. The man who united the Mongol tribes also united the minds of his world, leaving a legacy that continues to intrigue and inspire to this day. Stay tuned as we explore more facets of Genghis Khan's enduring influence, peeling back the layers of myth and reality to uncover a history that's as rich and varied as the empire he built. As we peel back the layers of Genghis Khan's enduring influence, it becomes clear that his story is a tapestry woven with threads of both myth and harsh reality. Let's kick things off with a look at the Silk Road's revival under the Mongol Empire, a highway of commerce that turned into the medieval world's most epic trade route. Genghis, the unlikely architect of this economic wonder, transformed the Silk Road from a perilous trek into a bustling artery of international trade. It's like turning a back alley into a 6-lane highway, except the potholes were bandits and corrupt officials. Under his rule, the Silk Road wasn't just a trade route, it was the Silk Autobahn. Genghis Khan's policies, including the Yasa law code, ensured that merchants could travel with something resembling safety. It's like he slapped a "No Bandits Allowed" sign across Eurasia. Tariffs abolished, trade barriers obliterated. The man was all about that free market life. Thanks to Genghis's economic foresight, silk, spices, and other luxuries flowed from east to west like a river of gold. And let's not forget the Yam postal system, which made sure messages and orders zipped across the empire faster than you can say medieval express delivery. But here's where things get spicy. With the trade routes came not just silk and spices, but also ideas, and unfortunately the Black Death. That's right, the very arteries that pumped prosperity into the Mongol Empire also became superhighways for the bubonic plague, spreading it with devastating efficiency. It's a grim reminder that progress often comes with a side of unintended consequences. It's as if history decided to throw in a plot twist worthy of a dark comedy. Now, let's shift gears to Genghis Khan's genetic legacy, which is the stuff of legend, or nightmares, depending on how you look at it. Geneticists estimate that around 16 million men alive today can trace their Y chromosome back to Genghis. That's about 0.5% of the world's male population, which is both mind-boggling and a testament to his, shall we say, prolific family planning. It's a legacy that speaks to the sheer scale of his conquests and the personal alliances he forged, often sealed with marriage. You could say he left his mark on history in more ways than one. But let's tackle the myth versus reality of his reputation. The romantic image of Genghis Khan as a ruthless conqueror often overshadows his role as a unifier of nations. Sure, he was a warlord with a penchant for brutal efficiency, but he also had a knack for bringing disparate tribes and cultures under a single banner. It's like he was playing the ultimate game of Risk, except the stakes were real, and the board was the entire Eurasian continent. Genghis Khan's empire wasn't just a flash in the pan. It was a testament to the power of leadership that embraced both tradition and innovation. And let's not forget the economic context. Genghis Khan's empire generated revenues that would make a modern CEO blush, thanks to his savvy trade policies and the flourishing Silk Road. This wasn't just a medieval smash-and-grab operation. It was a strategic economic powerhouse that connected the East and West in ways that were previously unimaginable. The Pax Mongolica, or Mongol peace, allowed for a period of stability that fostered this economic boom. It was as if Genghis had hit the pause button on intercontinental chaos, allowing trade and ideas to flourish. However, every silver lining has its cloud. The costs of maintaining such a vast empire were as steep as the Mongolian mountains. Corruption was an ever-present threat, with local officials occasionally skimming off the top, a medieval version of creative accounting that would have made even the greediest Wall Street banker proud. And as the empire expanded, so too did the challenges of governance. Balancing the books of an empire that spanned continents was like trying to herd cats, on horseback, no less. In the end, Genghis Khan's story is both a cautionary tale and an epic of human ambition. His empire, born in blood and fire, became a beacon of cultural and scientific exchange. The man who united the Mongol tribes also united the minds of his world, leaving a legacy that continues to intrigue and inspire. But as much as we romanticize the figure of Genghis Khan, it's crucial to remember the harsh realities of his conquests. He was a man of his time, a leader who wielded both the pen and the sword with equal dexterity. And while his methods could be as brutal as a Mongolian winter, the impact of his rule was as transformative as it was enduring. Reflecting on Genghis Khan's legacy, it's clear that his influence extends far beyond the battlefield. He was a complex figure who understood that power wasn't just about military might. It was about the flow of ideas, the strength of alliances, and the wheels of commerce turning smoothly. In the grand tapestry of history, Genghis Khan's story is a fascinating blend of ruthless conquest and economic ingenuity. He was as much a builder as he was a destroyer, and his empire became a crucible for cultural exchange that set the stage for future global interactions. As we wrap up this historical journey, let's take a moment to appreciate the dichotomy of Genghis Khan's legacy. He was a man who could raze a city to the ground and then rebuild it as a center of trade and cultural exchange. His empire, though born in chaos, became a model of order and efficiency that connected the world in ways that would have been unimaginable just decades earlier. So the next time you think of Genghis Khan, remember that his story is as much about the power of human ambition as it is about the harsh realities of medieval warfare. In the end, Genghis Khan's tale is a reminder that history is rarely black and white. It's a complex tapestry of myths and facts, of romance and reality. And while his methods were often as harsh as a Mongolian winter, the impact of his rule was as transformative as it was enduring. So let's give a nod to Genghis Khan, the man who reshaped the world in ways that continue to echo through the annals of history. His story is one of ambition, innovation, and a legacy that endures to this day, a testament to the power of leadership that dared to dream big and act boldly.